Chapter 901. But I don't want to be alone. Sister, I'm not afraid of death. I don't want to go, Lian Xiaozhou said, her eyes red. After experiencing the warmth of the human world, she had begun to be afraid of living alone. Seeing Lian Xiaozhou like this, Qin Yining's nose turned sour and he almost cried. He hugged Lian Xiaozhou and comforted her by patting her back. Don't worry. When I took you out of the mountains, you were my responsibility. You are my sister. I always keep my word. I won't leave you alone. But you know the situation Wang Yi and I are in. I'm afraid that if I take you back and your identity is exposed, we won't be able to protect you. Lian Xiaozhou blinked her big eyes sadly and bit her lip. I know, but I still don't want to be separated from you. She knew that Pang Xiao and Qin Yining's trip was dangerous. They were sisters. At the critical moment, she went to live a peaceful life, leaving Qin Yining alone to take the risk. How could she be at ease? What she was most afraid of was not that Qin Yining would leave her alone and not come to find her, but that Qin Yining would not be able to find her in the future. How could Qin Yining not understand what Lian Xiaozhou was worried about? He pulled her and persuaded her for a long time. Seeing that she seemed to have made up her mind, Lian Xiaozhou had no choice but to nod. Qin Yining asked Pang Xiao, do you have a suitable place? Pang Xiao thought for a while and said, wait a moment. I'll go ask Mu Tu. After saying that, she lifted her leg and left. Not long after, Pang Xiao and Mu Jinghu came back together. Qin Yining said in surprise, is Tianji Valley nearby? Yes. Mu Jinghu said, it's not far from here. Qin Yining frowned and said, but I heard from Boss Chiu that your Tianji sect is especially poor. You live in straw huts and sleep on haystacks. Even your food bowls are made of wood. Mu Jinghu blushed and coughed. That's because I can't bear to use a good one. It's not as exaggerated as what Shanshan said. Seeing Mu Jinghu's reaction, Pang Xiao could not help but laugh. He's the most stingy one in their sect. Tian Jizi is a master at accumulating wealth. The previous generations of Tian Ji sect leaders were all extraordinary people. They definitely have treasures hidden in their chests. It's not like we can't live a good life in Heaven's secret valley. Looking at Lian Xiaozhou, Pang Xiao said, it's just that Heaven's secret valley is someone else's territory. At that time, I couldn't arrange for my whole family to go there, so as not to disturb the peace of Heaven's secret valley. But little Kanji is just a little girl. I'll arrange for 2 more guards to protect her. There are only 3 people in total. Wood can still arrange it. Mu Jinghu nodded and said, yes, 3 people can definitely live there. The house and land are ready-made. They can be self-sufficient. It's also convenient to go out and buy things. But there are some special formations that need to be recognized if they want to go in and out. This is also easy. I'll just tell them. Qin Yining asked curiously, does Chimen Dunjia really exist in this world? In your Heaven's secret valley, ordinary people can't go in. Mu Jinghu nodded. Yes, but I don't know how to do it. Qin Yining nodded and asked again, then does Tian Jizi know how to do it? Martial Uncle has learned the art of geomancy for a long time, but the most powerful thing is still divination. In fact, I also wanted to learn Chimen Dunjia, but Grandmaster said that I was a blockhead and not very useful. He only taught me martial arts and medical skills. He also said that if he accepted another disciple in the future, he would teach him Chimen Dunjia. Qin Yining smiled and said, I know. Originally, your Grandmaster accepted you as Tian Jizi's disciple and let him teach you martial arts in order to let you protect Tian Jizi. But Tian Jizi was too lazy to take a disciple, so she pushed you to a junior brother who hasn't appeared yet. She only asked you to call her martial uncle. Mu Jinghu smiled embarrassedly and nodded. That's what happened. Since Tian Jizi is good at divination, it's certain that she will have a junior brother in the future. Qin Yining smiled and said, maybe your real Shizuan is already learning Qimen Dunjia. Mu Jinghu was stunned when he heard this. After thinking for a while, he grinned and said, maybe that's the case. Pang Xiao smiled and said, well, we've digressed too far. What do you think of placing little Kanji in Tianji Valley for the time being? Qin Yining thought for a while and said, I think it's good. He looked at Lian Xiaozhou and asked, what do you think? Lian Xiaozhou was naturally reluctant, but after thinking about it carefully, she also knew that Qin Yining was doing it for her own good. Although she was uneasy about her future life, she could only accept it. Qin Yining said, arrange 2 reliable bodyguards to protect her. In addition, I want to buy 2 maidservants to serve little Kanji. It's inconvenient for a girl to only have 2 men by her side. It's better to buy 2 maidservants. At least she can have someone to talk to. That's good. Blockhead, what do you think? Mu Jinghu smiled and said, it's okay. It's okay to have a few more. There are empty houses in the valley. But I won't tell outsiders how to get in and out of Tianji Valley. That's natural. You only need to tell 3 of them. The others don't need to learn. If there's anything that needs to be communicated, you'll have a way to send a letter. Mu Jinghu naturally nodded in agreement. Since the decision was made, the group naturally stayed in Liang City temporarily. Qin Yining's recuperation was one thing, but the most important thing was to prepare for life after entering the valley. Bing Tang and Ji Yun naturally knew that Lian Xiaozhou was leaving at the first moment. Although they couldn't bear to part with her, they also knew that the princess consort was willing to let Lian Xiaozhou leave because it was better for her to leave than to stay by her side. Bing Tang treated Lian Xiaozhou like a younger sister. He was sad, but he couldn't stop her. He could only prepare a large pile of pills and powders for her. He even gave her the handbook that he used to prescribe medicine. You can flip through it when you're bored. Don't forget what I taught you. Lian Xiaozhou's eyes were swollen like walnuts from crying. She sobbed as she nodded and kept the handbook close to her body. Qin Yining had personally examined the 2 servant girls that Ji Yun bought. He confirmed that they were from a poor family with many children. They were sold because they couldn't survive. The older one was 10 years old this year. She was called Pan Di and had an extremely cheerful personality. The younger one was 8 years old this year. She was a little timid and extremely honest. She didn't even have a name. Everyone in the family called her hey, wretched girl. Qin Yining smiled and said, little Kanji, give them a name. In the future, they will be your servant girls. Lian Xiaozhou thought for a while and said, Pan Di will be called my dong. Then she looked at the timid 8-year-old servant girl and smiled, you will be called Banksia. They're all medicinal herbs. Yes. Lian Xiaozhou smiled and said, they're all names of medicinal herbs that big sister Bing Tang told me. They're pleasant to hear and easy to remember. Qin Yining smiled, our little Kanji's naming skills are much better than before. Lian Xiaozhou recalled that she had insisted on calling her Kanji Lotus Seed Kanji. She couldn't help but find it funny and regretful. Qin Yining patted the back of Lian Xiaozhou's hand and comforted her, with my dong and Banksia by your side, I can rest assured. I will find you as soon as possible. You just have to focus on living your life well. We will definitely be reunited one day. Lian Xiaozhou nodded. Qin Yining looked at my dong and Banksia again, you two serve Miss Lian well and serve her as your master. In the future, you will benefit a lot. However, your Miss Lian has a good temper, but I'm not a pushover. If I find out that you disrespected her or betrayed her, we wouldn't dare. My Dong and Banksia were so frightened that they knelt down and kowtowed repeatedly. They didn't know who Qin Yining was, but they felt that this madam was like a fairy and was so dignified. She must be the madam of a wealthy family. They had heard of how wealthy families dealt with disobedient servants. After being frightened like this, how would they dare to be disloyal? Qin Yining played the role of the bad cop, so naturally, he gave the opportunity to play the role of the good cop to Lian Xiaozhou. Even little Kanji understood this and took the opportunity to call the two maidservants. When Qin Yining's cold took a turn for the better, Mu Jinghu brought Lian Xiaozhou and the rest to leave the inn quietly under the cover of the night. Qin Yining didn't send them off. Before Lian Xiaozhou set off, he only came to Qin Yining's side and held her hand quietly for a while. They didn't say any words of farewell. However, Qin Yining's heart was empty now that he had sent away another person who had always been by his side. Even Bing Tang and Ji Yun couldn't lift their spirits. 2 days later, Mu Jinghu rushed back and explained in detail that everything in the valley was fine. Only then did Qin Yining have no choice but to let go of this matter completely. The group once again braved the wind and snow and embarked on the journey back to the capital. This year, for some reason, they didn't have many sunny days along the way. The closer they got to the north, the more windy and snowy the journey became. On New Year's Eve, just as Qin Yining had said, they didn't make it to Mouse City at all. Instead, they spent New Year's Eve in a temple at the entrance of a small village with only 7 or 8 families. Everyone stayed in the temple as it snowed heavily outside. They listened to the whistling of the wind. There were a few bonfires in the temple. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao wrapped themselves in a fur coat and drank the strongest burning hot knife to keep warm. They listened to the men who traveled with them talk about the interesting things that happened when they were in the Tiger Army. Although it was a little simple, this New Year's was very interesting. The group walked through the cold winter. When they arrived at Daxing, which was 2 to 3 days away from the capital, it was already the 20th of the first month of the 8th year of Xingqiang. Pang Xiao had his own field in Daxing. Naturally, he brought his men to stay in the field for a few days to rest and reorganize. It would also be good for them to think about what to do next. In the main room of the field house, the large Kong bed by the window was heated up. There was a square table on the Kong bed with tea bowls, melon seeds, peanuts, candies, and dried fruits. The group sat around the square table. They didn't care about seniority and gathered together to talk. Qin Yining sat next to Pang Xiao and peeled melon seeds. He smiled and said, "Is it all right for us to talk here?" "It's fine. Don't worry. I've arranged for people outside." "That's good." Qin Yining put the melon seeds aside and picked up another one to continue peeling. "Actually, I've thought of an idea these days. Today, I'd like to ask Mr. Xia and Mr. Su to give me some advice." Chapter 902. How can I bear the praise of the two gentlemen? It's just a woman's small insight. Just treat it as throwing a brick to attract jade. Qin Yining thought for a moment and then said, "What I mean is that when we enter the city, Wang Yi and I will still have to travel separately." Travel separately. Pang Xiao didn't understand and asked, "How are we going to travel separately?" Qin Yining said, "It's not that we are going to travel separately. I am going to take some people to enter the city first as the vanguard. We haven't been back for a long time. The road from the capital to the old capital is very long. It's inevitable that news won't reach here. Now that we are back, we don't know His Majesty's attitude, so we need to find out what's true. First, Wang Yi has been in the old capital for a long time. The mountains are high and the road is far away. He doesn't know the attitude of the court officials and common people towards Wang Yi. I also plan on building support for Wang Yi first. When the preparations are complete, it won't be too late for Wang Yi to enter the city. Hearing this, Su Weiji couldn't help stroking his long beard. He nodded and said, Wang Fei is right. There is no harm in entering the city when we are fully prepared. Pang Xiao was a bit hesitant. Since he didn't know Li Qitian's attitude towards him, even if he wanted to test him, he couldn't use Qin Yining as a pathfinder. Qin Yining saw Pang Xiao's hesitation at a glance and said with a smile, Don't worry. I will enter the capital with great fanfare. No one dares to touch me. They want to use me to deal with you, but they care more about their face. Hearing this, Xia Yu also said, Wang Yi, this old man feels that Wang Fei's words are reasonable. Pang Xiao's eyebrows were tightly knitted, and the word Chuan was squeezed out between his eyebrows. Qin Yining smiled and said, I understand Wang Ye's worries. But you should understand that this is an important place in the capital. You can do whatever you want outside, but you can't do it here. If you do, it will be a stain on your life. Of course I understand. But that was when you were in the palace. Pang Xiao didn't continue, but everyone understood what he meant. Back then, Qin Yining had almost been framed in the palace. Even now, he was still afraid. If it wasn't for Qin Yining's intelligence, he would have been too far away to do anything. In the end, the only thing he could do was collect her corpse. Qin Yining laughed and said, You're worrying too much. I'm not in the palace right now. Xia Yu and Su Weiji both felt that Qin Yining's plan was feasible. However, they also knew that Pang Xiao valued Qin Yining very much. He would never allow Qin Yining to take risks for him. As aides, they were not in a position to persuade him. Everything had to be approved by Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao pondered for a long time and carefully considered the situation in the capital. Finally, he reluctantly nodded and said, All right, then bring more people. That's not necessary. We didn't bring many people back. I'll bring the servant girls and a few guards. No, you can only leave a few people for me. You can bring the rest. This is the capital. Even if I bring a few dozen people with me, if something really happens, can they fight 1 against 100? Pang Xiao was speechless. How many soldiers were there around the capital? Not to mention a few dozen people, even if there were a few hundred or a few thousand people, if Li Qitian really wanted to attack, they couldn't do anything. That was why Pang Xiao often complained about his incompetence. Seeing Pang Xiao's annoyance, Qin Yining wanted to persuade him, but it wasn't good to say too much in front of Xia Yu and Su Weiji. He only patted the back of Pang Xiao's hand to comfort him. Don't worry, I promise it'll be fine. Send people outside the city to pay attention to the movements in the city. When the time is right, you can appear. Pang Xiao pursed his lips. After a long time, he said, It's my incompetence. What is Wang Yi saying? Wang Yi and I came here to fight side by side. If I wanted peace, wouldn't it be better for me to hide somewhere along the way? Xia Yu sighed and also persuaded, Wang Fei is right. Wang Fei is thinking for you. Don't disappoint her. Yes, Wang Fei is righteous. I also admire her. Su Weiji also raised his hands. Qin Yining quickly waved his hand, Sirs, please don't be like this. Mu Jinghu, who had been listening at the side, said, Don't worry, I'll accompany Wang Fei into the city. Pang Xiao looked at Mu Jinghu and nodded heavily, saying, With you here, I can rest assured. Mu Jinghu smiled and said, I'll say the same thing. I can't promise anything else, but I can guarantee Wang Fei's life. Pang Xiao nodded. Although he agreed to Qin Yining's suggestion, he was already prepared for the worst. After the plan was set, Xia Yu asked, When does Wang Fei plan to leave? We'll leave tomorrow. The earlier we finish this, the better the Wang residence can be reorganized. When they left the capital, Qin Yining brought his family with him. They thought they would never come back. The servants in the residence had all been dismissed. The residence had been empty for so long. They didn't know what it was like. After everyone finished discussing, Peng Xiao went to pick out 20 Jinghu Wei. Add Bing Tang and Ji Yun. Bring Mu too as well. Qin Yining smiled and nodded, don't worry. I'll act according to the situation. There won't be any danger. What could Peng Xiao say? Just as Qin Yining said, she was his comrade who fought side by side. She wasn't someone who hid under his wings and wanted him to protect her. The next morning, Qin Yining took the Jinghu Wei that Peng Xiao had chosen and left the country estate in a carriage. Peng Xiao, Xiaoyu, Su Weiji, Huzi, and the remaining people temporarily stayed in the country estate. Peng Xiao made arrangements for them and ordered them to take turns to monitor the situation in the city and report it promptly. If anything happened, he would be able to arrive in time. The ground in the north was still covered in snow during the first month. This year's snow was heavier than previous years. The road was very difficult to walk on. They could have arrived in 2 days if they were faster, but they walked for 3 days. When they arrived at the city gates, it was already 9:15 on the 24th. At this time, the city gates were already closed and there was a curfew in the city. Qin Yining frowned and said, "We came back at the wrong time." "That's right. It's all because the road is difficult to walk on." "Wang Fei, are we still going to set up camp in the wilderness?" Qin Yining thought about it and said, "There's no need for that. Even though there is a curfew in the city, the curfew depends on the person. I'm a Wang Fei, so we should take advantage of my status for once." As he said this, he turned around and ordered the Jinghu Wei named Tang Xiu, Xiao Tang, go to the sentry post and see what kind of person is on duty at the city gate today. Hearing this, Tang Xiu immediately nodded and urged the horse towards the city gate. Qin Yining sat in the carriage and looked at the situation in front of the city gate in the distance. Tang Xiu raised her head and said a few words to the people above. Then she urged the horse back and reported, "Wang Fei, the person on duty at the city gate today is surnamed Gong. He was a soldier under Wang Yi for 2 years and has been promoted to the rank of commander." Qin Yining smiled and said, "Your family's Wang Yi really has a lot of connections. It's good. Take this and tell him that His Highness's family is on their way back and has been delayed for too long. It wasn't easy for them to reach the city gate, but it's all ready this time. Ask him if he can make an exception and open the city gate to let us in." As he said this, he handed Tang Xiu a round jade pendant with long tassels hanging from it. It was a sword tassel. Chapter 903. Seeing Tang Xiu bring Peng Xiao's sword to the city gate, Ji Yun and Bing Tang held their breaths. Ji Yun whispered, "Wang Fei, will Gong Zongqi make an exception and open the city gate?" "It's hard to say." Qin Yining smiled, "It's not like we have to enter the city immediately, but since we're in the middle of the night, we might as well try." Bing Tang said, "If that person remembers Wang Ye's old friendship, he will definitely open the gate." "Not necessarily." Qin Yining said, "It depends on whether that person has an upright and plain-spoken personality or a smooth and sly personality. I had Bing Tang bring the sword over not because I wanted to use Wang Ye's token to impress anyone. I just heard that Gong Zongqi was once under Wang Ye's command, so it was easier for him to identify him. Otherwise, there would be other ways to prove his identity. Whether or not he remembers their old friendship, as long as the other party is smooth and sly enough, he will let us in. After all, no one wants to offend Wang Yi, right? It's just a matter of turning around and reporting a few things to the higher-ups." So Wang Fei predicted that even if he was willing to open the gate, he would turn around and report it. "That's right. We came back in an open and above-board manner, not to commit crimes. We just came back a little late and arrived at this hour, so we asked them to make an exception for us. So what kind of people are the curfews restricting? There are so many brothels in the capital. If the curfew was really banned, wouldn't those brothels close down? Bing Tang and Ji Yun looked at each other. They had to admit that Qin Yining was speaking the truth. Whether it was in the Dian dynasty or the Dezhou dynasty, some laws only restricted the ordinary people who had no special privileges. People like Wang Yi and Wang Fei, who didn't use their status to suppress others, were in the minority. Just as they were talking, there was a sound from the city gate. Soon, Tang Xiu came back with a tall and muscular middle-aged man. Gong Wen greets Wang Fei. Qin Yining lifted the curtain and said with a smile, "No need for formalities, Commander Gong. Our group originally planned to return before the curfew, but the road was blocked by ice and snow, and we were traveling south. No matter how fast we rushed, we were still too late. I have no choice but to ask Commander Gong if you can make an exception and allow us to enter the city. Otherwise, it would be really hard to endure the cold weather." Gong Zongqi smiled and said, "If it was someone else, it would be impossible, but Princess Consort is an exception. Wang Yi is loyal to the country, and Wang Fei is a husband and wife. Both are pillars of Dezhou. It's just a small matter like opening the city gates. Wang Fei, please follow this lowly official. You flatter me. Sorry for making things difficult for you. It's nothing." As the two of them spoke, the carriage and the procession slowly moved forward. Gong Zongqi followed beside the carriage and smiled as he chatted with Qin Yining. He then asked, "Why isn't Wang Yi with the princess consort?" Qin Yining pretended to be surprised and said, "Could it be that Wang Yi hasn't returned to the capital yet?" Gong Zongqi was stunned for a moment before he smiled and said, "Not yet." Qin Yining nodded and said, "I received a letter from Wang Yi saying that your majesty ordered us to return to the capital. Thus, I hurriedly brought everyone and set off. If Wang Yi hasn't arrived yet, he should be arriving soon." "I see." Wang Yi and Princess Consort came separately. "That's right." Qin Yining sighed with a worried expression. However, he didn't say anything else. At this time, the group of people had already arrived at the city gates. Gong Zongqi gave the order and someone opened the heavy gates halfway. Qin Yining's carriage and the procession smoothly entered the city gates. Qin Yining got out of the carriage and thanked Gong Zongqi again. Gong Zongqi waved his hand and smiled, "Princess Consort, don't be like this. There is a curfew in the city now. It's more important for you to return to the prince's residence." "Many thanks, Zongqi." The group of people left the city gates and headed towards the center of the city. Gong Zongqi watched as Qin Yining's procession walked away and then turned to report to his superiors. Prince Zhongshuan's consort had returned to the capital and Wang Yi would arrive soon. Even though he had opened the gates for convenience, he still had to report to his superiors. The streets of the capital were especially quiet at night. The sound of wheels and horse hooves sounded crisp in such a quiet environment. Qin Yining temporarily closed his eyes to rest. They had returned to the prince's residence and had to tidy up before they could rest. He didn't know what the prince's residence had become without anyone taking care of it for so long. Seeing Qin Yining close his eyes to rest, Bing Tang and Ji Yun did not make a sound. They helped Qin Yining tighten his dark blue cloak and then the two of them also went to sleep. There was still some distance from the city gates to the prince's residence. Qin Yining had been on the carriage for such a long time and was already tired. Perhaps it was because she felt at ease after entering the city, she unconsciously became drowsy. Her head rested against the wall of the carriage as she dozed off. The silver butterfly earrings on her ears swayed as the carriage moved and rubbed against her white jade neck. At this time, a wave of noise suddenly came from the quiet street. Several young masters dressed in brocade and jade clothing were walking on the quiet street with their arms around each other's shoulders. It was such a cold day, but their faces were flushed and their bodies were steaming. When they spoke, their tongues were thick and their words were slurred. It was clear that these people were slightly drunk. The new person in the front row of Yu Hua Lu is a great beauty. Burp, if you don't believe me, you'll know when you get there. The leader of the group, a young man wearing a black sable fur collar and a cloud brocade cloak, pointed in the direction of Yu Hua Lu and said with drunken eyes, "Let me tell you, when that young lady smiles, half your bones will melt." Ha, ninth young master only knows how to boast. Hey, you don't believe me. Burp. The young man called ninth young master gave a long burp and pointed at the corner. You'll know when you get there. If your bones don't melt, I'll ask someone to beat you until you melt. Ha ha ha. The group of young masters laughed unscrupulously. On the quiet street, their laughter was especially wanton. Just as these people turned the corner, they suddenly saw a carriage slowly approaching. Beside the carriage were a dozen or so men. There were no signs on the carriage. Looking at the frame, it was just an ordinary carriage with a flat head. There was an infuriating wind lantern hanging on the carriage that flickered and flickered. It was obvious that the group was of ordinary birth. Ninth young master narrowed his eyes and pointed at Qin Yining's carriage and laughed. Ha, there's still a carriage on the street at this time. Ninth young master took 2 steps forward and almost tripped over his left foot. However, he didn't care at all and walked toward the carriage with swaying steps. The coachman and the ferocious tiger guards had already noticed these drunken playboys. Seeing that the well-dressed young man dared to bump into the front of the carriage and was about to be trampled under the wheels, the coachman quickly pulled the reins to stop the carriage. The carriage shook. Qin Yining opened his eyes in a daze and was still in a daze. What's wrong? She curiously lifted the curtain and looked outside. Ninth young master and his group had already gathered in front of the carriage. Seeing the carriage come to a stop, the thick, dark blue curtain was suddenly lifted up. Borrowing the light from the wind lantern hanging on the carriage, he saw an exquisite little face that seemed to be carved out of a sculpture. Oh my, this is really... The young masters behind ninth young master were stunned. Ninth young master's eyes lit up and he hurried forward, breathing quickly. Qin Yining was slightly sober by the cold wind. Seeing the situation outside, he lowered the curtain. He softly asked Mu Jinghu outside the window, "What's going on?" Mu Jinghu said, "Nothing. It's because we met a group of drunkards." Young lady. Ninth young master was about to move closer to the carriage door. However, the Jinghu Wei immediately surrounded the carriage. The men's tall and sturdy bodies were like a wall, keeping the young masters outside. Ninth young master couldn't help but get angry. Why, young lady, are you not going to let others see you? Why don't you try to rope in your old customers when you're doing business? Qin Yining frowned. He didn't want to bother with this person's vulgar words. In the capital, the Jinghu Wei didn't dare to act rashly without Qin Yining's instructions. However, they were already angry at the group of young masters' impudence. All of them stood upright and protected the carriage with their iron-like bodies. Ninth young master kicked Jinghu Wei's calf. Jinghu Wei didn't move at all, but he almost fell down. Young lady, which family are you from? You dare to walk on the streets in the middle of the night? Do you think you're so great with so many people protecting you? You have to understand the rules of doing business if you're in the flesh business. Are you going to never do business with me in the future? You didn't even greet me. You're too indecent. Qin Yining couldn't help but sneer when he heard the drunkard's words from inside the carriage. Outside the carriage, Mu Jinghu couldn't take it anymore and reprimanded, "Don't spout nonsense." Nonsense? She was brought out of the building at this hour. Do you think she's a chaste woman? The group of young masters heard ninth young master's arrogant words. Although their brains were numb from drinking too much, they still knew their limits. Someone pulled ninth young master and said, "Don't be like this. What if she's the family of one of the court officials?" "Impossible." Ninth young master said drunkenly. "Do you think it's so easy to meet such a beauty? I've seen many girls in the red light streets of the capital, but I've never seen such a beautiful one." In the past, it was said that the Prince Zhongshuan's consort was a beauty. However, didn't that woman go to look for the Prince Zhongshuan? How could the person who was brought here in the middle of the night be the princess consort? Don't make me laugh my teeth off. His words were getting more and more offensive. Qin Yining said to Mu Jinghu, who was outside the window, "Young Master Mu, find out who he is." Mu Jinghu asked, "Who are you? How dare you be so shameless and impudent?" "Who am I? Ha, is there anyone who doesn't recognize me?" Ninth young master laughed loudly, as if he had encountered the most interesting thing in the world. Ninth young master had never lacked people who flattered him. He immediately stood out and said, "You have eyes but fail to recognize empty tie. This is ninth young master of the Chang public house." Qin Yining heard everything from inside the carriage. Her eyes lit up when she heard the words Chang public house. Chapter 904. The Jinghu Wei had long disliked these young masters who were full of filthy words. If not for Qin Yining's orders, how could they have just stood there and tolerated them? Now that they heard Qin Yining's voice, before Mu Jinghu could do anything, the Jinghu Wei had already taken action. These men, who had gone to the battlefield to kill their enemies, were fearless when facing an enemy, let alone these hedonistic young masters who spent their days indulging in debauchery and debauchery. Before the ninth young master could make a single move, Tang Xiu had already lifted him up by the collar like a chicken. "Ah! What are you doing? Let me go, let me go." Ninth young master's legs kicked wildly and his hands clawed wildly. Suddenly being captured, he was already half sober. Because Qin Yining had only ordered for him to be captured, the other young masters behind him were all fine. Seeing that ninth young master had been captured, everyone was shocked and wanted to rush forward to save him. However, when they saw that the Jinghu Wei were all tall and strong and were glaring at them covetously, they knew that they did not have the ability and did not dare to step forward. They only dared to gather their courage and shout, "Who are you? Let go of ninth young master." You probably didn't hear clearly. This is the youngest son in the Chang public house that the High Duke dotes on the most. If you dare to touch a strand of his hair today, the High Duke will skin you alive tomorrow. That's right, let him go. Send someone over, quickly. Some people shouted, while others were smarter. Perhaps because they were not drunk, they turned around to report. Although ninth young master was slightly flustered, there was a limit to his fear. When he saw his own people running to report, he stopped panicking and shouted, "You stinky woman, how dare you order people to capture this young master? When my father brings people over, none of you will be able to escape. If you know what's good for you, come out and kowtow 3 times to this young master. Serve this young master well tonight. When this young master is satisfied, I can consider sparing your life, otherwise." Slap. The shouting was replaced by a loud slap. Ninth young master's face was slapped to one side. Mu Jinghu said coldly, "How dare you use filthy words to take liberties with Princess Consort Zhong Shun, you must be tired of living." What? What did he say? Ninth young master's ears were buzzing and he could not hear a single word clearly. On the other side, the foppish young masters who came with him were also stunned. Did we hear wrongly? That person just now said Prince Zhongshuan's consort. Yup, it seems to be true. That's, the group was at a loss. Qin Yining lifted the curtain of the carriage. Her bright face looked even more gentle and beautiful under the lamplight. She looked at ninth young master, then looked at the group of foolish young masters, and said in a deep voice, "Don't worry. Someone wants to report." Just in time, go and tell Duke Changhua that his youngest son spoke rudely and took liberties with the loyal Qin Wangfei. If he wants her, he can go to the Wang Fu to get her. After saying so, ninth of the Jinghu of Zong of Yong's Yi. Jinghu Wei's men carried ninth young master into a carriage at the back and stuffed him inside. They were annoyed by his noise and even used a rag to gag him. The wheels creaked as they rolled over the black brick road and gradually moved further away. The group of hedonistic sons looked at each other with worried expressions. What should we do? She really seems to be Prince Zhongshuan's wife. Are you sure? Didn't they say she was in the south? I'm sure. I've seen that face before. Even your bones will turn soft when you smile. But this person is too. She's married to a fiend. She's become a yiksha. She only took advantage of him verbally. Why did she start yelling about killing him? Let's not talk about these useless things. Let's think about what to do first. What to do? What else can we do? I don't have a choice. I can only tell Prince Zhongshuan's residence. The group of heirs walked away while discussing. Tang Xiu, who stayed at the corner of the street to listen in on the situation, heard all these people's movements. Only then did she catch up with Qin Yining's carriage. Princess Consort. They've gone to report. Good. You've worked hard. Qin Yining lifted the carriage curtain and said. This can't be called hard work. But Princess Consort, this Prince Zhongshuan's residence is an old official of Beiji. After the present emperor overthrew him, he didn't touch a hair on this old official's head and still kept his title of duke. The Shang family of Prince Zhongshuan has a lot of influence among the old officials of Beiji. If we really offend them, we may offend the entire Beiji faction in the future. Hearing this, Qin Yining nodded and said with a smile, I know. Tang Xiu knew that Qin Yining would have a plan. Before they set off, Wang Yi had specifically ordered them to listen to Princess Consort's arrangements. Therefore, Tang Xiu didn't say more. They returned to the Wang Fu bestowed by the emperor and knocked on the door. The old servant who had been left behind to watch the night watch was still in disbelief. Princess Consort has really returned. Yes. You've worked hard watching the house these days. Qin Yining said with a smile. It's not hard, it's not hard. This residence is large, and it's not good for me to walk around. I've just stayed in the room. I haven't seen anyone come in these days. This old servant was wondering when Wang Yi would be sent back to Jing. I hadn't thought that Princess Consort would come back. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. The group entered the Fu. When they had left Jing, Qin Yining had been forced out of the Wang Fu by the Yao clan. After that, she had been busy with the funeral and had not been able to attend to the matters of the Wang Fu. While she had safely sent Yao Qinggu, his wife, and the Yao clan away, Yao Qinggu had arranged everything in the Wang Fu himself. The large residence that had been bestowed by the emperor to the Wang Fu was now empty and dusty. Yao Qinggu had not left anyone to watch the house. He had only left a gatekeeper. It seemed that he had expected that she would not return. Qin Yining smiled and said, the Wang Fu is such a large residence. We have a limited number of people. Why don't we all stay in the outer courtyard? 1. It's easier to clean up. 2. We can take care of each other when we gather. Even though it was against the rules, they had stayed in the same inn before. However, they had all stayed in the outer courtyard. They were not in the same side courtyard, so it was not a big deal. The Jinghu Wei naturally had no objections. They smiled and agreed. The 20 or so young men rolled up their sleeves and began to tidy up in full swing. They were good at killing enemies on the battlefield. They were also good at other things. Qin Yining and Ji Yun carried the bags into Pang Zhao's study in the outer courtyard. She had planned to stay here for the time being. Bing Tang went to instruct the group of uncouth men to do their work. Soon, the house was mostly cleaned up. Bing Tang took the key to the storeroom and brought some people to retrieve the bedding. Everyone was assigned rooms and arranged for night watch shifts. Then, they all went to rest. Mu Jinghu was arranged to stay in a side room in the courtyard of the study. Before going to bed, Mu Jinghu lifted Jiu Gongzi, who was tied up and pouting, and said, "Should we lock him up first? Untie him. There's no need to gag his mouth." Mu Jinghu raised his eyebrows and immediately untied Jiu Gongzi. Jiu Gongzi immediately threw away the rag in his mouth and spat twice. He glared angrily at Qin Yining. "You evil bitch, let me go." Qin Yining stood on the steps in front of the study. The gentle light in the room shone from behind her and covered her body with a warm halo. Jiu Gongzi could not see Qin Yining's expression, but he heard her gentle voice say something that almost angered him to death. "Since you don't know what's good for you, I'll just tie you up." Mu Jinghu laughed and said, "That's easy." As he spoke, he tied Jiu Gongzi's arms behind his back and tied him up in a few moves. Jiu Gongzi shouted angrily, "You! Show!" Qin Yining raised a finger and said, "If you scold me again, I'll gag your mouth too." "How dare you? Didn't you see whether I dared or not? Wang Yi and I were ordered to return to the capital. We had just entered the city when I was insulted by your filthy words. How will your majesty deal with this matter?" Jiu Gongzi gritted his teeth. He did not know how your majesty would deal with this matter, but Pang Zhao was famous for being a fan of his wife. He was also very protective of his children. His wife had been molested by him, how could he let it go? Thinking of this, Jiu Gongzi finally controlled his temper. It was not a bad thing to suffer less before his family came looking for him. Qin Yining laughed and said, "Looks like you're not stupid." Mu Jinghu laughed and said, "You should rest." As he spoke, he picked up Jiu Gongzi and walked out. At the same time, he did not forget to pout his mouth and even cover his eyes. Qin Yining could not help but laugh when he saw Mu Jinghu being so careful. Jiu Gongzi was not a powerful person. Even if he was untied, he might not be able to leave the prince's mansion. However, it was better to be safe than sorry. This person was still useful to her, so there was nothing wrong with being careful. After returning to the inner room of the study, Qin Yining rested on the heated Kong bed by the window that Pang Zhao often used to read. Bing Tang and Ji Yun went to find firewood and started to burn the heated Kong bed. The heated Kong beds in the north were the favorite of people like Qin Yining, who had a cold constitution. The three of them were not particular about it. The three of them huddled together and slept well that night. The next morning, Qin Yining woke up early. After washing up, she sat in front of the table and let Bing Tang help to comb her hair. Comb it into a simple round bun and pin it with a silver hairpin. Just wear the stone green robe that you were wearing when you came back. The plainer, the better. I know. Don't worry, princess consort. If we're going to put on an act, we have to go all the way. That's exactly what I meant. Ji Yun came in from outside and put down the plain porridge and side dishes on the tray. She said with a smile, "Nubi will go and buy some servant girls today. This Fu is very lifeless right now. It needs more people to liven things up. And, the little booklet in my dowry has the addresses of the old people that our family used to hire starting from the 10th page. Let's consider hiring them first. 1. We will be familiar with each other and it will be easy to use them. 2. We were in a rush to send them away and did not make proper arrangements for them. If they are willing to come back and work, we can subsidize them. Yes, I know that Wang Fei is the most soft-hearted. Ji Yun smiled. At this time, Tang Xiu's voice came from outside the door. Wang Fei, Changwa Gongfu has sent a visiting card. So fast. It seems that idiot really is liked by Changwa Gong. Qin Yining let Tang Xiu bring the visiting card in. The person who sent the card was not Changwa Gong, but the foreign of Changwa Gong. The visiting card politely stated that she would come to the Wang Fu to visit this afternoon. She did not know if she had the time to meet. If she could not, she would send the visiting card tomorrow. Such politeness and sincerity, how could Qin Yining not accept? Chapter 905. Tang Xiu accepted the order with a smile and quickly went to send the reply. Ji Yun then asked, "What does Wang Fei plan to do?" Duke Changhua is an old official from Beiji's civil court. Your Majesty didn't even touch a hair of Duke Changhua. If something goes wrong, I'm afraid Duke Changhua will be angry and unite with the old officials of Beiji to deal with us. I'm afraid it won't be good. If it was a few years ago, Duke Changhua might have done that. But the situation in the court is different now. Not to mention the distant past, in the eyes of outsiders, I'm afraid my father is an example. Those factions in the court, whether it's the old officials of Beiji or the aristocratic families, saw the mainstay of the dying court like the surrendered officials end up like this. Your Majesty isn't even willing to give him a posthumous honor. Could it be they still don't understand? You mean, Duke Changhua chose to keep a low profile and suffered this loss? Qin Yining slowly nodded, not to mention that we captured his youngest son. Even if it was his legitimate son or legitimate grandson, he wouldn't dare to do anything at this juncture. Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh when he said this. You can know from the invitation sent by Duke Changhua's foreign. Ji Yun stilled, that's true. This servant is thinking too much. Qin Yining shook his head and pulled Ji Yun's hand, saying with a smile, you are thinking for me. I understand. The two looked at each other and smiled. Qin Yining smiled and said, when you go out these days, pay attention to the situation in the court. There are some things that we don't know outside. Yes, this servant will pay attention. After everything was arranged, Qin Yining and Bing Tang stayed in the room to do needlework. She made a list and prepared to buy some elegant, soft, and comfortable hang silk and cocoon silk to make clothes for Zhao Gu and Han Gu. The children weren't by her side, but they were growing every day in her mind. She imagined how they would look when they grew up. Even if she didn't have a chance to let them wear it in the future, she entrusted her heart to it. Time passed quickly. In the afternoon, Qin Yining rested for a while. Just as she finished washing up, Ji Yun reported from outside, Wang Fei, Duchess of Changhua requests an audience. She is in the reception pavilion right now. Got it. Qin Yining stood up. Both of you, come with me. Yes. Bing Tang and Ji Yun answered in unison. Bing Tang asked, Princess, don't you need to change your clothes? Qin Yining lowered her head to look at herself. She was dressed in a bluish-green robe and a long white dress. The only jewelry she was wearing was a white jade bracelet on her wrist and a silver hairpin to hold her hair in place. Qin Yining thought for a moment, then put on a cloak made of silk with a sable fur collar and lotus petals that she rarely wore. The silk on this cloak was exquisite and the color was simple and elegant. The sable fur on the shoulders was black and bright. Because she liked it too much, Qin Yining couldn't bear to wear it. Her casual attire, with such a precious cloak, even if she didn't wear heavy makeup, didn't adorn it with gold hairpins and pearls, she still looked noble. She wouldn't lose her status as Prince Zhongshuan's consort. Qin Yining took the two maidservants to the corridor. As she walked, she thought about what might happen next. When she arrived at the flower hall, she had already prepared her mood and entered the door with no expression on her face. She saw a plump matron over 60 years of age. She was wearing a peacock blue cloak with large sleeves. She wore a jade hairpin in her hair, and her white hair was neatly tied up. Her appearance was noble and elegant. Even though it was spring and autumn, it could be seen that she was a gentle matron of good birth. Behind her was an elderly mama and a young daughter-in-law. Other than that, there was no one else. Seeing Qin Yining come in, the Duke Furen of Changhua stood. Her gaze landed on Qin Yining's body with shock. However, her gaze was very polite and restrained. There was no rudeness, and it did not give people a feeling of discomfort. Qin Yining gave a faint smile. "This is the Duke Furen of Changhua. Please sit." I don't dare. The Duke Furen of Changhua bowed and said, "In terms of honor, it is this old one who should pay respects to Wang Fei." "What is this?" The Duke Furen of Changhua is of virtue and prestige. "You are also an elder, this junior cannot afford your courtesy." Qin Yining moved to the side to avoid her courtesy. She used her hands to support the other and modestly allowed the other to sit. She turned and ordered, "Serve good tea." "Yes." Ji Yun quickly went to prepare. A short while later, she came back with a blue and white covered bowl. The Duke Furen of Changhua saw that Qin Yining treated guests warmly and did not have the domineering air she had imagined. She couldn't help but hate Shang Jihua even more. Shang Jihua was the son of the Duke Furen of Changhua when she was over 40 years old. For this son, she almost lost half her life. She finally managed to raise him safely, but who would have thought that he was a playboy who did not have any ambition? Usually, he drank wine with women, gambled, and fought with crickets and cocks. She had already broken many of his rattan vines. He liked Biaomei and was unhappy with his wife because of Biaomei. In order to make him change, she had reluctantly become an evil mother-in-law and allowed Biaomei to enter the family as a concubine. But she hadn't thought that after he got the person, he would start to act up again after a few days. Putting aside the fact that he was lenient in the red light district, this time, he actually dared to take liberties with Pang Zhixin's wife in public. Seeing her today, the Duke Furen of Changhua Furen had to admit that the woman in front of her was so beautiful that even a woman like her couldn't help but want to take a few more glances. 40 to 50 years ago, her appearance was considered dignified when she was young, but it was not even 1/10 of her. This was a woman who could make men fall head over heels for her. That was why she was able to charm Prince Zhongshuan to the point that he dared to go against the imperial edict for her. Now, even her foolish son had fallen for it. The Duke Furen of Changhua Furen sighed in her heart. Although she felt a bit helpless, she did not have any resentment towards Qin Yining. Was it wrong for a woman to be born with a beautiful appearance? There were many men who had seen Qin Yining. Not everyone was like her good-for-nothing son who would take liberties with Biaomei in public. In the end, it was her son who was disappointing. If she did not use this chance to properly punish the boy and use this chance to turn him around, who knew what kind of disaster he would cause in the future? Therefore, this time, the Duke Furen of Changhua Furen came to beg for leniency. She sincerely apologized and reconciled. She did not care what the Duke Furen of Changhua Furen was thinking. In any case, as a mother, she already regretted spoiling her youngest son. "Wang Fei, this old one came today for my good-for-nothing son. I know that he offended Wang Fei this time. Everything is his fault. I did not teach him well. It is my dereliction of duty as a mother. I sincerely apologize to you." The Duke Furen of Changhua Furen stood up and curtsied. The old mama and daughter-in-law behind the Duke Furen of Changhua Furen also curtsied. Qin Yining quickly stood up and stopped her from curtsying. He helped her sit down again and said faintly, I understand Duke Furen of Changguo Furen's motherly heart. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen sat back in her previous position. Seeing Qin Yining's expressionless face, she knew that her move of family affection had not worked. Her apology was sincere, but it was also part of her plan to move the other. She did not expect this Wang Fei to be so steady and not be moved by external matters when she was just 20 years old. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen thought of what the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen had said before she left. The daughter of Wise Pan and is not an ordinary woman. Interacting with her is different from interacting with ordinary women. After you go, you only need to sincerely apologize. Do not play any tricks. Right now, we are already treading on thin ice. If you want little Zhou-er's life, you have to go along with her. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen's heart shook. She was already regretting her actions just now. She was used to rolling around in the inner chambers and would inadvertently use her usual moves. Wang Fei, please calm down. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen said urgently, it is this old one's fault for not teaching my son well. That is why he is so lawless. Wang Fei is the daughter of a proper official's family. Your status is noble. How can you allow that evil creature to insult you? No matter what, it's all that evil creature's fault. Wang Fei can capture him, but I ask Wang Fei to punish him harshly. Once you've vented your anger, please allow this old one to bring him home and discipline him strictly. Qin Yining looked at the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen's fearful appearance for her son and could not bear it. If she was a domineering and unreasonable person, she had many ways to teach them a lesson today and achieve her goal at the same time. But facing this kind of woman, she could not bear to carry out those plans. Forget it. Qin Yining said, the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen is innocent in the end. As the saying goes, it is the father's fault for not teaching. Your son is your youngest son, but this is a patriarchal world. I think that even if the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen wants to teach your son well, the world will not allow your son to stay with a woman like you all day. When he said this, the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen's heart ached and her tears almost fell. In the end, women understood women the best. Qin Yining's words were exactly what she was troubled about. Qin Yining smiled. Today, I do not want to trouble you. The fault for not teaching him well is on the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen. I want to have a secret talk with the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen. If the Duke Furen can pass on the message and arrange it properly, your son's matter will be easy to handle. On the other hand, if the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen could not do it and spread the news, the 9th young master's ending would be uncertain. Since it was a serious crime to take liberties with the Wang Fei. Even if Qin Yining killed him, the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen could not do anything to her because of the Pang Shao. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen's heart beat rapidly as she looked in shock at Qin Yining. She could faintly smell a conspiracy. Looking at Qin Yining's bright face and her confident expression, the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen hesitated for a moment before nodding. All right, this old one will definitely pass on the message and guarantee that the people around me will not leak the news. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen is a smart person. This way, everyone will benefit. If the Duke Furen agrees, I will tell you how to arrange the meeting. Yes. The Duke Furen of Changguo Furen stood and bowed, saying, since this is the case, this old one will bid farewell. There is no order in the circle. For offending the Wang Fei, I hope that Wang Fei will give him 2 more days. Qin Yining understood that the Duke Furen of Changguo Furen was afraid that she would kill the 9th young master before they could come to a conclusion. Chapter 906. After sending off Duke Chang's wife, Ji Yun and Bing Tang served Qin Yining back to his room to rest. In the evening, Tang Xiu came back and said, Princess Consort, someone from Duke Chang's residence has sent word that Duke Chang has agreed to your request." Upon hearing this, Qin Yining's stern expression relaxed, and he quietly let out a long sigh of relief. As long as Changgui Duke nodded his head, the matter would be more than halfway done. The next day, Mu Jinghu personally led Duke Chang to the prince's residence without being noticed. Duke Chang did not expect Qin Yining to have such a skilled person by his side. He also did not expect this chivalrous person to not bring him through the door, but over the wall. He was so shocked that he broke out in a cold sweat. When he looked at Qin Yining again, his gaze was different. It was a pity that such a person was a woman who could do things so boldly and decisively, and her methods were not restrained by trifles. Qin Yining and Duke Chang had a secret conversation for 4 hours. In the dead of the night, Mu Jinghu silently sent Duke Chang back. Other than Qin Yining and Duke Chang, no one knew what they talked about. Other than the two of them and Mu Jinghu, no one else knew that Duke Chang had come to the prince's residence. Even Duke Chang's wife, who was closest to Duke Chang, did not know. She was still anxious about her youngest son. The next day, Qin Yining asked Tang Xiu to bring out Jiu Gongzi, who had been locked up for 2 days. After being tied up for 2 days, without eating or drinking, Jiu Gongzi was half dead. Once he saw Qin Yining, his eyes were filled with hatred. Mu Jinghu said, "Do you know your mistake?" Jiu Gongzi gritted his teeth and straightened his neck. He wanted to shout, but he did not have the strength. Secondly, he was afraid of the person in front of him. After a long while, he squeezed out, "I did nothing wrong." What did I do wrong? Think about it, which decent woman would go out in a carriage in the middle of the night? You brought this upon yourselves. I was just going to have a drink with a courtesan and met you on the way. How would I know that a princess consort would go out in the middle of the night? In the end, I was captured by you guys. I was wronged. As ninth young master spoke, tears welled up in his eyes. Qin Yining was amused by his shameless words. He took 2 steps forward and stood in front of the person sitting on the ground. He said condescendingly, "It's my freedom whether I want to walk at night or not. I walked at night, is that the reason for your rude remarks? Whether or not I am willing to walk at night, and whether or not you behave properly, are 2 different things. Are you going to push all the blame onto others? You met me this time. I have a lot of people around me, so I didn't let you take advantage of me. But what if it was a girl from an ordinary family?" Qin Yining didn't want to waste any more time with this person. He said, "Beat him 10 times with the plank and send him back to his father." Yes. Tang Xiu had already received Qin Yining's instructions. She strode over with a wooden plank in her hand. Ninth young master was so scared that his face turned pale. He said, "How dare you? You vicious whore, how dare you hit me? My father is the Duke of Changgua. If you hit me, my father won't let you off. You still haven't cleaned your mouth at a time like this. Beat him." Qin Yining flicked his sleeves and went back into the house. Soon, the sound of the plank cracking and ninth young master's wailing could be heard from the courtyard. The 10 planks were quickly finished. Ninth young master didn't even have the energy to cry. He asked Tang Xiu to bring people to send him back to the Duke of Changgua with a wooden plank. Ji Yun and Bing Tang vented their anger and spat fiercely. Serves him right. This kind of person should be taught a lesson. That's right. If we don't teach him a lesson now, who knows how many girls this bad guy will harm in the future. However, after scolding enough, the 2 of them were a little worried. After all, the Duke of Changgua's status was there. Princess consort, will the Duke of Changgua fly into a rage out of humiliation or hold a grudge against you? Bing Tang asked worriedly. Don't worry. I have my own arrangements. Right now, I have another matter for Tang Xiu to do. When Tang Xiu comes back, ask him to come over. Yes. Bing Tang nodded seriously. Ji Yun smiled and said, Princess Consort, this servant has looked through the register you gave me. According to the address on it, I contacted many old people to come back. This morning, people have already come back to the residence one after another. However, there are still not enough people in the residence. Do you want to buy more? Qin Yining thought for a moment and said with a smile, there's no need. Just use the old people in the residence first. Pay attention to the purchasing matter first. If there are suitable young maidservants, just find a few will be enough. Yes. Does Princess Consort plan to keep a few young maidservants by your side? That's right. Qin Yining said with a smile, in the future, when our lives are stable, I will find you a Ru-Yi husband and marry you off in a grand manner. If you are willing, then you can be a steward's wife by my side. At that time, I will definitely not have enough maidservants by my side, so I am preparing in advance. Ji Yun's face immediately turned red. Looking at her, she really had a rosy face and peachy cheeks. Her appearance was outstanding. Princess Consort, don't talk nonsense. How am I talking nonsense? Qin Yining blinked innocently. Men should get married when they are of age and women should get married when they are of age. Don't tell me I will keep you as an old maid forever. At that time, I'm afraid you will hate me. Princess Consort only knows how to talk nonsense. Ji Yun stomped her feet in embarrassment and turned to leave. When Qin Yining and Bing Tang saw this, they couldn't help but laugh. After laughing enough, Bing Tang asked, Princess Consort, our residence is so big, but not all of the old people from before can come back. I heard from Ji Yun that only about 20 of them were brought back. This way, the residence seems too empty. It's not a big deal. If the residence is empty, then let it continue to be empty. There is no need to renovate the mottled walls and tiles. Just maintain the current situation. Bing Tang didn't understand Qin Yining's intentions. Such a good residence bestowed by the emperor, but it was very old and gloomy. If outsiders saw it, they would probably gossip behind their backs and say that Prince Zhongshuan was lonely. Otherwise, how could the residence be so dilapidated? However, Bing Tang knew that since Qin Yining did this, he must have made arrangements, so she didn't continue to ask. Not long after, Tang Xiu came to see Qin Yining. Qin Yining had Ji Yun and Bing Tang stand guard outside the door. He whispered a few words into Tang Xiu's ear. Tang Xiu said in surprise, Princess Consort, you mean to tell people about Wang Ye's deeds in a book? Yes. Qin Yining said with a smile, when you go out these few days, observe carefully which places have the most people listening to storytellers and which storytellers are more popular. As for the content of the storytelling, we will tell them about the scenes of Wang Ye's battles. Tang Xiu's eyes lit up when she heard this. She nodded repeatedly, this is good, this is good. Princess Consort, you don't know, but Wang Yi was really too mighty on the battlefield. Wang Yi led the troops like a god. He was always the first to charge and the last to retreat. Not to mention anything else, all the brothers in the army were very impressed by Wang Yi. Wang Yi was also very righteous towards his brothers. He never embezzled the provisions. Sometimes, when he was nervous, he would even supplement his own silver to pay his brothers. Tang Xiu clearly worshipped Pang Xiao. When she talked about Pang Xiao's great deeds, she couldn't stop talking. She was so enraptured that she was spilling beans. Qin Yining nodded repeatedly as he listened. He smiled and said, what you said is very good. Also, there's the part where Wang Yi sacrificed himself to save the lives of the people. In addition, there's also the part where Wang Yi was extremely righteous and refused to massacre the people in the city. Tell all of these to the storytellers and teach them how to tell them in the most crowded places in the city. Qin Yining thought for a moment, then added, "It's not just about Wang Ye's past achievements. There's also the conflict between the Yuqi Yan and the Southern Yan Commandant Qi Shujie in the south this time. If Wang Yi didn't show up, I'm afraid that the Southern Yan Commandant would have already started a war." Tang Xiu blinked. Those who knew the inside story of the Southern Yan Commandant knew that it wasn't like what Qin Yining said. But with this kind of publicity, Wang Ye's reputation would become better and better. This wasn't a bad thing. Seeing that Tang Xiu understood, Qin Yining smiled and handed this matter over to her. He even said with a smile, "After you've made the arrangements, I'll go listen to the storytellers." "Wang Fei, do you still need to go listen to the storytellers? You've already seen Wang Ye's matter and recorded it in your heart." "That won't stop me from going to join in the fun," Qin Yining said with a smile. Tang Xiu also smiled. She rubbed her palms together and went out to make the arrangements. Just as Tang Xiu was spending time contacting the storyteller, the news of the enmity between the Prince Zhongshuan's imperial consort and the Chang country duke's family had spread. Some people didn't believe it and felt that there was no meaning in the Chang country duke offending Qin Yining for no reason. However, ninth young master was beaten with a plank and carried back to the Chang nation duke's residence. Many people had witnessed his miserable appearance. Other than this, there were also people who made up many versions of the story of the love and hate between Qin Yining and the Chang country duke's family. Through word of mouth, there were many versions of how the enmity between Qin Yining and the Chang country duke's fu came to be. As a result, in just 3 to 5 days, the enmity between Qin Yining and the Chang country duke became the irreconcilable enmity between the Pang Shao and the Chang country duke. The news was even spread quite well. Qin Yining was in the fu. Hearing the news from various sources, he was in a very good mood and ate half a bowl of rice. Wang Fei, the tea houses in the city are all talking about Wang Ye's heroic deeds. He pacified the Dian, fought the bandits, and quelled the Southern Yan rebellion. Right now, 8 out of 10 people were talking about Wang Ye's bravery and loyalty during their leisure time. Someone even made up a children's song and the children are singing it in the streets and alleys. Tang Xiu smiled and said, "Right now, the storytellers are the most enthusiastic about talking about Wang Ye's campaigns. The level of excitement is not inferior to Three Kingdoms." Qin Yining laughed when he heard this. "Then what have they been talking about recently?" They were talking about how Wang Yi didn't use a single soldier to pacify the chaos in the south. The Yuqi Yan and Yuqi Shujie joined forces to rebel. They wanted to use the military to disrupt Dezhou, so they tried to sow discord between the court officials in an attempt to restore the Dian dynasty. In the end, their evil plan was seen through by Wang Yi. Wang Yi only used a little strategy, but the Yuqi Yan and Yuqi Shujie started to rebel. The Yuqi Yan even killed Yuqi Shujie, who had saved his life. Right now, the commoners are cursing the Yuqi Yan for being a good-for-nothing. Qin Yining nodded. Tang Xiu continued, "In any case, Wang Ye's image of being both intelligent and courageous has already spread far and wide. Even children are fighting to pretend to be Wang Yi when they play house." Chapter 907. When Qin Yining heard this, he couldn't help but laugh. If this was in the past, although Pang Shao was very popular among the people and was respected by them, he always had a sense of being high and mighty. He was not as close to the lives of the people as he was now. The current situation was exactly what Qin Yining wanted. To be able to change the direction of public opinion and make a person who was originally distant become deeply entrenched in the hearts of the people was sometimes very simple. It was clear that one could achieve anything with effort. Qin Yining was curious about the situation outside, but because he had to pretend to be a person whose entire family had died, it was not easy for him to have fun while he was in mourning. He couldn't swagger out and wander around, so he could only disguise himself and go quietly. After listening to a few stories, Qin Yining's blood was boiling. The stories that clearly didn't happen were made reasonable by the storyteller. Even she almost believed it. The storyteller's thin lips talked about the battles on the battlefield and the struggles for power. It was much more exciting than the experiences of the people who were personally involved. At the beginning of February, even the housewives in the capital knew about the story of Pang Zhao's Shi Ping Nan Yen. The image of Yu Qiyan as a despicable person who repaid kindness with enmity became more and more deeply ingrained. Even the old women who gathered together to sunbathe would shake their heads and look at him with disdain. In the garden of the Jinan Wang residence, Yu Qiyan stood with his hands behind his back. His white hair was tied up in a bun, and the newly made silk robe he was wearing seemed a bit too loose. When the wind blew, the robe fluttered, as if it was hanging on a bamboo pole. Two older women knelt in front of him, trembling like sifting chaff. "What were you talking about just now?" Wang Yi, this servant didn't speak." Yu Qiyan roared, scaring the two maidservants into sobbing on the spot and repeatedly kowtowing. "This servant also doesn't know. This servant went out to buy some things and heard someone telling a story next to a small tea stall in the market. So impudent. How can you really believe the nonsense of those bumpkins outside? This servant doesn't believe it, this servant definitely doesn't believe it." The maidservants kowtowed repeatedly. Yu Qiyan clenched his fists tightly, the veins on his forehead bulging. His whole body trembled as he gritted his teeth and said, "Guards." Wang Yi. The steward of the Wang mansion stepped forward and bowed. Yu Qiyan pointed at the two women and said fiercely, "Slap their mouths. Fight. Give him a good beating." The in-charge acknowledged and waved his hand at the servants behind him. The manservant immediately came forward and pressed down on the shoulders of the two maidservants. He took out the bamboo boards and held them in his hands. The two maidservants were so scared that their faces turned pale. They repeatedly kowtowed and begged for mercy. "Wang Yi, we won't dare to do it again. Wang Yi, please spare me." This servant didn't say anything. "It's the outside world. It's the outside world that's spreading the news. It would have been better if they didn't say this." When he heard that, "the outside world is spreading the news," Yu Qiyan's eyes turned red. He roared, "Beat them." The servant immediately complied. He raised his arm and fiercely swung the bamboo pieces down. Only the sound of "paw" and "paw" could be heard. The two maidservants were hit so hard that they couldn't even let out a wail. In just 2 or 3 moves, their faces were swollen. Yu Qiyan clenched his teeth and his jaw tightened. He glared at the two maidservants. The two manservants who were in charge of the punishment hit them more than a dozen times. They saw that the two maidservants were crying and their faces were swollen like balls. There were also deep purple marks on their faces. They were afraid that if they continued to hit them, their faces would be smashed. They couldn't help but slow down their movements. They hesitated and stole a glance at the steward. The steward was also hesitant. "Wang Yi, you continue to hit them. Did this king ask you to stop? Could it be that you won't listen to this king's orders? This servant doesn't dare." The two manservants were so scared that their faces turned pale. They hurriedly moved again. The steward wanted to say something but stopped. He lowered his head and couldn't bear to watch. Yu Qiyan stared at the two maidservants who had been beaten until they were vomiting blood. He saw that the blood they spat out was mixed with teeth. Their faces were swollen beyond recognition. The turbid anger in his heart seemed to have found an outlet to vent. He couldn't control the nonsense of the people outside, but could he not control the people at home? Just as Yu Qiyan stared at the two maidservants, clearly wanting to see the manservants beat them to death, Gu Shixiang rushed over with the help of 2 manservants. "Stop!" The old man's voice trembled and he coughed a few times. The two manservants carrying out the punishment heard this and immediately stopped as if they had been pardoned. Yu Qian was feeling good when he was suddenly interrupted. He abruptly turned to look at Gu Shixiang. Wang Yi, these two maidservants spoke carelessly. They deserve to be punished. They must have learned their lesson and won't do it again in the future. Gu Shixiang cupped his hands and said, Wang Yi, please be lenient and let them live. Yu Qian pursed his lips. His previously gentle eyes were now devoid of weakness and gentleness. His gaze became cold, and his expression was full of suppressed resentment. They are servants of this king's estate. They have done such a thing. If this king wants to punish them, he can. Wang Yi is right. Gu Shixiang sighed and said, but Wang Yi has always been benevolent. You, benevolent? Yu Qian raised his chin and sneered at the hazy sky. What's the use of being benevolent? Seeing that he was about to say something that others couldn't hear, Gu Shixiang hurriedly waved his hand at the steward. The steward immediately understood and ordered the two maidservants who had been beaten unconscious to be carried out. The manservants also quietly retreated. In the blink of an eye, only Yu Qian and Gu Shixiang were left in the garden. Wang Yi, this old man knows the bitterness in your heart, but you have to think about the long term. You can't throw away your greatest strength for these things. Strength? What other strength does this king have? Are you saying that he is soft-hearted and benevolent? Ha! What a joke! Yu Qian raised his head and laughed, his eyes gradually turning red. Gu Shixiang's words of advice seemed to poke at the embarrassment that he hid in his heart and didn't want others to see. This king's soft-hearted and benevolent is the representation of weakness. Look at what those people outside are saying about this king. Despicable villain, ungrateful. This king is the ruler of a fallen country, a useless coward. They say that this king is a bastard who licks people's shoes and drags out an ignoble existence. Who knows the bitterness of this king? Wang Yi. Be careful with your words. Gu Shixiang hurriedly stopped him, afraid that Yu Qian would continue to say something disgraceful. This was the capital, right under the nose of Li Qitian. As long as Li Qitian wanted to, Li Qitian would know what kind of underwear Yu Qian was wearing. They had already been misunderstood by the people of southern Yan and had lost the support of the people. They had been attacked by the Pang Shao and had fled back to the capital. It wasn't easy for them to find shelter, so they should hide their strength and bide their time. At this time, it really wasn't good for them to cause any more trouble. But looking at Yu Qian's crazy appearance, Gu Shixiang only felt powerless. Yu Qian was still the same, not good at politics. Now he was almost crazy, and even his previous patience and forbearance had been forgotten. Yu Qian's fists were clenched tightly as she huffed and puffed. Her teeth were clenched so tightly that creaking sounds could be heard. Looking at Yu Qian like this, the thoughts that had been lingering in Gu Shixiang's letter became clear again. He was old. In order to restore the country, he had sacrificed enough. Other than his own old life, his family, and his future, he had sacrificed everything else. But things were still in this irreversible state. Perhaps he should let go. Wang Yi, you're probably tired. Why don't you have a good rest? As for the storytellers outside talking about Pang Zhishi, someone must be behind it. It's even possible that the Pang Zhishi themselves are trying to create a positive image for themselves. You don't have to be so angry in the face of your opponent's slander. Let's just think of a way to fight back. Fight back. How? Yu Qian was stunned for a moment, then asked anxiously. He didn't know how to think on his own when he encountered problems, but instead asked him first. Gu Shixiang couldn't help but smile bitterly at how dependent he was. I still have to think about it. Think about it. If you think about it, this king's reputation will be trampled underfoot. Did he still have a good reputation now? Gu Shixiang sighed inwardly and shook his head. He only said that he would go back and think about it, then left the residence. Yu Qiyan didn't get a solution to the problem. When he thought about how the two servants gossiped behind his back, he got angry. That night, he ordered people to throw the two servants out of the residence, and no one was allowed to save them. The next day, the news that two corpses were found in front of the Jinan residence spread. Bing Tang frowned and said to Qin Yining, "This is too cruel. I heard that the two servants' faces were badly swollen. All of their teeth were knocked out, and one of their cheekbones was broken. They were thrown out while they were still running a high fever. The weather is cold, but it doesn't freeze water. The two of them were thrown to the cold ground and died overnight." Ji Yun was filled with righteous indignation when he heard this. They really have no regard for human lives. There's always a reason to punish servants, whether it's punishment or selling them. Although there are cases of private punishment like this, there's no such thing as brazen. Does the Jinan prince not care about his reputation? Qin Yining sighed and said, "He's probably too angry." With Yu Qiyan's temper, it wasn't strange for him to do something like this. Qin Yining didn't know how to feel about the former kind-hearted person becoming like this. In any case, they were standing on opposite sides. Both of them wanted the treasure, so there was no turning back. Daxing Estate. Huzi said with exultation, "Wang Yi, there are commoners praising you everywhere in the capital. Even a 3-year-old child knows about your deeds. Hey! Wang Fei is really amazing. In such a short period of time, your reputation among the commoners has become so high. Why didn't we think of this method before?" Pang Xiao said with a smile, in the past, she needed to keep a low profile. Now she's high profile. Huzi asked, "Wang Yi, can we enter the city now?" Pang Xiao stood up and stretched his stiff muscles. He said, "Pass down the order. Prepare the carriages and horses. We'll set off immediately." Pang Xiao led 20 or so tiger spirits and the two strategists, Xia and Su, to rush to the capital. They were twice as fast as Qin Yining. But when they arrived at the city gates, Pang Xiao ordered them to set up camp and not enter the city. There were many commoners and carriages going in and out of the city on the road in front of the city gates. Pang Xiao's group of 20 or so people had set up a few tents not far away. It was especially eye-catching because there was a bright flag on the tents with a neatly written swastika character on it. The commoners who were literate knew that Prince Zhongshuan's group had arrived outside the city. Chapter 908. Princess Consort, Princess Consort. Wang Ye's troops are back. Bing Tang quickly walked into the room and said crisply. Qin Yining was sewing when she heard this. Her hands paused and she looked back to ask, "Have they already entered the capital?" "Not yet. The people in the residence received the news when they went out to buy some things. They said that Wang Yi and his troops are stationed not far from the city gates. It's already been a night, but they have no intention of entering the city." Bing Tang's tone was puzzled. Could it be that Wang Yi has other things to do? Qin Yining continued to sew when she heard this. Her smile was gentle and sweet. She did not tell Pang Xiao what she was going to do after entering the city. However, Pang Xiao had returned to the capital and stationed himself outside the city. This meant that he had quickly made a decision to cooperate with her after learning about the situation in the city. How could she not be happy with such tacit understanding? It's fine. If they're willing to station themselves outside the city, then let them be for now. We don't have to worry and just live our own lives. Bing Tang saw that Qin Yining was so calm and guessed that her masters had other plans. She was not worried anymore. At the same time, the people in the capital's restaurants, tea houses, and streets were all discussing this matter. In their hearts, Pang Xiao's image was at its most glorious. The great hero had returned and was going to openly walk in through the city gates. Didn't this mean that they would all have a chance to see the true face of the great hero up close? The people were very excited and were all looking forward to it. All the diners on the first floor of the restaurant were discussing it. Perhaps Prince Zhongshuan came back too late yesterday and the city gates were already closed. That's why he stationed himself outside the city for a night. After he finished his preparations today, he immediately came back. Perhaps that's how it is. Then should we go to the city gates and wait? Don't tell us that Wang Yi and his men have already returned to the residence. Then wouldn't we not be able to see the great hero? Hey, do you guys think that the great hero pacified the Southern Yan rebellion? Your Majesty will definitely reward him handsomely, right? Definitely. Your Majesty might even personally go out of the palace to welcome Wang Yi. Tang Xiao was mixed in the crowd. She heard the discussion of the crowd. She smiled and took a sip of wine, threw a broad bean into her mouth, and chewed it. Wang Fei's prophecy was amazing. With just a few books, all the people in the city were excited. Now, the way they welcomed Pang Xiao was even more admiring than the family members who had followed the army when they attacked the city gates of Beiji. At this time, someone had already gone to scout ahead. There were also shops that faced the street, where one could see the position of the pedestrians on the street by opening the windows. They were also fought over by the commoners. Many families refused to return and waited for Pang Xiao to enter the city. On top of the city gate, Gong Zongqi looked at Pang Xiao's camp not far from the city and could not help but frown. Commander, what do you think Prince Zhongshuan is doing? Why is he not willing to enter the city when he is here? Right now, many commoners have gathered on the streets of the city. They all want to see Wang Yi return to the city. If Wang Yi does not come in, the city will become chaotic. Yes, Commander, what should we do? Should we report back to the higher-ups? If there is chaos among the commoners, it will be hard for us to explain. Gong Zongqi frowned and said in a low voice, the commoners in the city are already in such a state. The higher-ups should have known long ago. Forget it, after reporting back, it is good to let the 5 cities' warden's office make preparations. Yes, with so many commoners gathered in one place, it is inevitable that some rascals will take the opportunity to cause trouble. The 5 cities' warden's office can avoid some trouble by being on guard. Everyone looked at the camp not far from the city. They all had the same thought, Prince Zhongshuan, hurry up and enter the city. Pang Xiao was reading a book in his tent. Huzi brought over steamed buns, smoked meat, and pickled vegetables. He smiled and said, Wang Yi, time to eat. Pang Xiao nodded. Sit down, let's eat together. Okay. Huzi agreed. The two of them had fought together and gone through fire and water many times. It was common for them to eat from the same bowl. Wang Yi, when do you plan on entering the city? Huzi took a big bite of the steamed bun and asked in a muffled voice. Pang Xiao said, let's just wait here. When the time comes, there will be someone in a hurry to let us enter the city. Huzi scratched the back of his head and nodded. He did not ask any more questions. It did not matter if he did not understand. Wang Yi and Wang Fei clearly had a tacit understanding. As followers, as long as they followed orders, they would not make a mistake. The bustle in the city continued until night fell. The commoners waited for an entire day but did not see anyone come. It was time for the curfew. Although everyone wanted to wait a little longer, they had to go home because of the curfew. Today, Wang Yi did not enter the city. Perhaps he was held back by something. Let's come early tomorrow and wait. His Highness will enter the city tomorrow no matter what. What you say makes sense. Tomorrow, maybe we can get a good spot and see the great hero up close. The city gate guards and the people of the 5 cities warden's office saw that the commoners had listened to orders and left. They could not help but let out a long sigh of relief. If these people gathered together to cause trouble, then it would be difficult to deal with. Commander Gong and the commander of the 5 cities warden's office were thinking that perhaps Wang Yi would enter the city tomorrow morning. But the next day, there was still no movement from Pang Zhao's side. The number of commoners in front of the city gates and even on the streets increased. Even the tea houses and restaurants along the streets became more and more popular. In the afternoon, the chatter of the commoners, who had been excitedly waiting to see the great hero, died down. The waiting became impatient. Someone began to complain and ask, "Why hasn't he entered the city yet?" At this time, someone in the crowd whispered, "Wang Yi has done a great service in pacifying the south this time. Why is there no one from the court to welcome him?" When these words were said, it immediately woke everyone up. That's right. For such a great contributor, there should be a lively welcoming ceremony. Haven't you seen how in the past, when the great generals returned from war, Your Majesty would send important officials to welcome them? Right. I still remember when the Protector General of the country was still alive, there were several great victories. At that time, the Emperor would personally welcome him. When the Protector General Pang Zhongjing was mentioned, everyone quickly thought of a problem that they had overlooked. Isn't Prince Zhongshuan the Protector General's posthumous son? He really is a Huzi of a general's family. That's right. Dragons give birth to dragons and phoenixes give birth to phoenixes. Look at the Protector General's family bloodline. Speaking of this, the old people who had personally seen Pang Zhongjing's execution began to feel uneasy. Really, at that time, the incapable ruler was simply killed with 1,000 knives. Protector General Pang was such a good person, but in the end, he ended up like that. That's right, when the Protector General's blood spilled in the capital and the Pang family's blood flowed like a river, many people would still feel a lingering fear when they thought of it. It was precisely because the incapable ruler was afraid of the meritorious minister that he had tortured and killed Pang Zhongjing that the long-suppressed anger of the people erupted like a tsunami. And now, it was precisely because of Pang Zhongjing's son that they wanted to avenge the Protector General's death. Thinking of what had happened at that time, everyone's heart was very heavy. Now, Prince Zhongshuan, who had made a great contribution and returned to the capital, was actually quietly living in a tent outside the city with 12 people. In a place like the capital, if a plaque fell, it would hit 3 high-ranking officials. There were so many officials in the imperial court, but none of them said anything about going to welcome him. But when Jinan Wang fled back from the south, Your Majesty even arranged for a high-ranking official from the Ministry of Rights to welcome him. The dignified Prince Zhongshuan, the great hero who pacified the south, was treated worse than a despicable villain. Some people were outspoken and thought so, so they said so. These words resonated in many people's hearts, and they couldn't help but whisper in each other's ears. They didn't dare to loudly discuss the matters of the imperial court, but seeing Prince Zhongshuan being treated so coldly, and thinking of the Protector General who didn't have a good ending, no one felt comfortable in their hearts. There were even some straightforward people who directly said, Prince Zhongshuan wouldn't have a life as miserable as his father, right? Some people sucked in a breath of cold air when they heard this, and whispered to the people next to them. There were also some people who were more cautious. Seeing that the situation here wasn't good, they quietly hid. But the majority of the people still stayed where they were. Everyone's mood changed from the initial excitement to the current anger. The content of the discussion also changed. The people of the warden's office of the 5 cities were maintaining order on the streets, so how could they not hear these discussions? They shouted loudly, and the commoners shut their mouths in front of them. But the moment they turned around, the buzzing sounds of discussion rang out again. They couldn't capture all the commoners in the city. Faced with the tidal wave of discussion, they could only stare helplessly. There was nothing they could do. A large number of people had gathered in the capital, and the content of the discussion was very unpleasant. How could Li Qitian not know? At this time, someone had already reported what had happened in front of the city gates to Li Qitian. Your Majesty, right now the people are gathered in the streets, all waiting to see Prince Zhongshuan enter the city, but Prince Zhongshuan has not moved. If they continue to gather, I'm afraid that something bad will happen. Your Majesty, please make a decision quickly. Li Qitian sat with a dark expression behind the black desk of the imperial study. His hands were tightly clenched into fists, so he didn't curse out loud. What is he trying to do? The soldiers are at the city gates, threatening Jin. The officials heard this and bowed their heads. They knew that Your Majesty was confused by anger. Pang Xiao only had a dozen or so people at his side. How could this count as soldiers at the city gates? Li Qitian looked at Lu Heng, who had been silent the whole time, and said, Zhongyibo, what do you think about this? Lu Heng stepped forward and bowed. Your Majesty, this official thinks that at this time, we should think of a way to calm the people. Calm the people? What was the people's voice? Li Qitian knew what the people were talking about and what they were thinking. He was the son of heaven. Did he have to act according to other people's wishes? Li Qitian said in a low voice, Xiong Jinshui. This servant is here. The head eunuch Xiong Jinshui came forward and bowed. Li Qitian ordered, go and pass on Jin's order. Tell Prince Zhongshuan to quickly enter the palace and meet His Majesty. Don't delay. Xiong Jinshui bowed and said, this servant obeys. Then he quickly retreated and did as he was told. Chapter 909. Lu Heng also did not dare to say anything at this time. One had to pay attention to the timing and observe the situation. Since this matter did not involve his own life, there was no need for him to provoke the Son of Heaven's displeasure and bring trouble to himself for no reason. However, Lu Heng, who had his eyes lowered, didn't agree with Li Qitian's actions. Your Majesty is a resourceful person. To say something disrespectful, how could a person who was able to use the banner of Chao Zhongjing to rise to power and successfully sit on the throne be an idiot? But now, perhaps because he had been high and mighty for too long, he didn't like to use his brain when doing things. He preferred to use thunderous methods to suppress others. Pang Zhishi looked like a boorish man, but he was meticulous and knew how to make good use of people. I heard that Qin Yining had returned a long time ago, but Pang Xiao hadn't. When Pang Xiao returned to the capital, the situation in the capital was like this. It was very obvious that this was a scene that the husband and wife had planned. Your Majesty didn't care at all and stepped into the trap. The most frightening thing was that the husband and wife had probably already predicted Your Majesty's personality and the thoughts of the court officials. They knew that as officials, no one would stop Your Majesty from walking into the trap when he was extremely angry. They had calculated everything perfectly. What appeared in Lu Heng's mind was Qin Yining's spirited little face and wise eyes. His heart sank. This woman, in the end, didn't belong to him. The disappointment and unwillingness in his heart couldn't be dispelled. Lu Heng could only pretend to be calm and not let his thoughts leak out. In front of the city gate, there were even more commoners than before. The scene was as lively as a temple fair. There were even smart vendors shuttling through the crowd, selling sesame seed cakes, tea eggs, and other food. There were also young girls around the age of 10 carrying baskets of sweet fruits and caramel candy. The capital in early spring was still very cold. Everyone had waited for so long that they were already hungry. If the conditions allowed, they naturally bought food to eat. Right at this moment, a fast horse suddenly galloped past on the main street. Sitting on the horse was an eunuch wearing an iron-gray round-collared sunflower gown. The commoners all stared in the direction that the eunuch had left. They only saw him arrive at the city gates and say a few words to the soldiers guarding the gates. Naturally, he was allowed to leave the city. Some people in the crowd began to speculate. Could it be an imperial edict from the palace? Very likely. But with Wang Ye's great contributions, even if your majesty doesn't personally welcome him, you should at least arrange a high-ranking official. What is the meaning of sending a eunuch to call him in? Hey! You brat, are you tired of living? How dare you spout nonsense? Although there were people who tried to dissuade them, it was not just one person who had such thoughts. The topic that had been discussed in the crowd was once again brought up. The commoners exchanged their thoughts as they ate. There were even people who were speculating that Pang Shao was treated coldly even though he had performed meritorious deeds. It was most likely because his meritorious deeds had shocked the emperor. Hey, someone outside the city saw that master eunuch go to see Wang Yi. Someone near the city gate said loudly. The news spread by word of mouth. Very quickly, the surrounding commoners all knew that the eunuch had really gone to pass on an imperial edict. The speculations and discussions were even harder to suppress. The people of the warden's office of the 5 cities were sweating profusely as they tried to maintain order and scold those who were talking nonsense. But with so many people present, how could they manage all of them? In the temporary camp outside the city, Xiong Jinshui was all smiles as he bowed to Pang Shao. Wang Yi, your majesty has ordered you to immediately enter the city and enter the palace to meet the emperor. Wang Yi has been away for so long. Your majesty must be missing Wang Yi. Pang Shao smiled and cupped his hands in the direction of the capital. This subject obeys the decree. Then he turned around and gave the order to break camp. Xiong Jinshui hadn't thought that things would go so smoothly. He couldn't help but let out a sigh of relief. Wang Yi had returned to the capital but was not willing to enter the city gates. He must have his own plans. Your Majesty called him back with one sentence and even arranged for him, an internal court official, to pass on a message. This was indirectly expressing Your Majesty's dissatisfaction with Pang Zhao's delay in entering the city. His status was low, and his words carried little weight. He didn't dare to question Your Majesty and didn't dare to speak too much in front of Wang Yi. It was very difficult. He was most afraid that Wang Yi would be dissatisfied and capture him to punish him. Not to mention punishment, even if he was killed, Your Majesty probably wouldn't do anything to Wang Yi. Wouldn't he have lost his little life for nothing? Fortunately, Wang Yi was not an unreasonable person. Huzi and the others were already prepared to break camp. Hearing this, they quickly packed up everything. Soon, Pang Shao ordered the troops to set out. Seeing him so straightforward, Xiong Jinshui's face was also full of smiles. He mounted his horse and followed Pang Zhao's troops to the city gates. Soon, they arrived in front of the city gates. There were already many commoners who had stopped to watch. Gong Zongqi quickly walked out and respectfully bowed. This subordinate, Gong Wen, pays his respects to Wang Yi. Pang Shao dismounted and helped Gong Zongqi up. He smiled and said, "It's you. I haven't seen you in 2 years. You haven't changed much." Facing such a forthright Pang Shao, Gong Zongqi naturally thought of the days when he was under Pang Shao. A sense of joy and respect spontaneously arose. Gong Zongqi's face turned red from excitement. He grinned and said, "Wang Yi still remembers me." "Of course. We're brothers. How could you not remember?" Not far away, the commoners heard the conversation between the two. Some of them whispered, "Wang Yi is indeed a righteous and benevolent man. Wang Yi doesn't put on any airs at all." Usually, Pang Shao would not purposely talk to the commoners by the roadside. At this time, he would have mounted his horse and directly entered the city. But today, he smiled and greeted the commoners by the roadside. When the commoners saw this, they felt as if a big meat pie had fallen from the sky and hit their heads. They were so happy that they were dizzy. Some cupped their hands, some bowed, some kowtowed, some praised, some thanked, and some were so excited that they could not say a word. The commoners' excited expressions and cheerful voices mixed together. The enthusiasm was so warm that it could turn early spring into midsummer. Pang Xiao smiled and cupped his hands to return the greetings. He even responded to some of the greetings that could be heard clearly. He answered some of the questions that could be heard, such as, "How's the South? Is life tough? Will Southern Yan send troops? Have the bandits who killed family Qin been caught?" Qin Yining returned to the capital in plain clothes. The prince's residence was desolate and had to hire new people. The news that all of the family Qin's family members, the old madam, and old master of the prince's residence were killed by bandits on their way to the south had already spread. The great hero had protected the south for the country and the commoners so that they could live and work in peace. However, his mother, elders, and his wife's family had all died. Many commoners could empathize with such a tragedy and felt sympathy. Compared to Pang Zhao's suffering, they felt pity and respect for him. Thus, there were people who asked about and comforted Pang Zhao. Pang Zhao took his people a few steps toward the city gate and had to stop to answer the commoners' questions. Seeing that he was so easygoing, the commoners were emboldened and began to talk to Pang Zhao. Xiong Jinshui followed beside Huzi and led the horse behind Pang Zhao. He was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. It was still too early for him to be happy. There was a little person in Xiong Jinshui's heart that was crazily screaming, "This servant is begging you, my Wang Yi. Hurry up and enter the palace. Your Majesty has waited for so long in vain. I'm afraid he's going to show his might. This servant can't bear it." However, Pang Zhao didn't understand Xiong Jinshui's inner wailing at all. He still warmly greeted the commoners. Seeing that Pang Zhao had returned, the commoners all rushed to the city gate. The great hero in their hearts was like a celestial being from heaven. His aura was even more powerful than the angry Vajra in the temple. Although he was powerful, he spoke to them so gently and without arrogance. The commoners, who had been listening to stories and fantasizing, were extremely excited to see the great hero up close. Pang Zhao was surrounded by the commoners. Even the warden's office's scolding had no effect. Pang Zhao didn't stop the commoners. Instead, he appeared even more gentle. Pang Zhao's group had only walked 100 steps into the city gate, but it took them more than 2 hours to walk. Gong Zongqi, Xiong Jinshui, and the people from the warden's office were about to cry. The biggest problem was that there were many people in the city. When they heard that the great hero had entered the city, they all hurried over. It was already chaotic in front of the city gate, but they didn't know how many more commoners would come. Pang Zhao saw that there were many people and was afraid that someone would accidentally fall and be trampled. Therefore, he shouted, "Everyone, don't push. Be careful. Don't fall." Pang Zhao's words were immediately echoed by people in the crowd. The people in the crowd were too embarrassed to push with all their strength. Qin Yining was sitting by the window on the second floor of the tea house. He smiled as he looked at the tightly packed crowd at the city gate. Bing Tang was also shocked. It's already been more than 2 hours. Wang Yi has only walked this far. How long will it take for him to reach the palace? Qin Yining smiled helplessly. The commoners are too enthusiastic. He can't do anything about it. Qin Yining nodded to Tang Xiu behind him. Tang Xiu immediately nodded and quietly retreated. Soon, another voice came from the crowd. Wang Yi is such a great hero, and he's such a good person. He sacrificed his own family to protect our Dezhou. Why are there only us bumpkins coming to welcome him? Why didn't the imperial court arrange for someone to come? When this topic was brought up again, the commoners who had close contact with Pang Xiao and even talked to Pang Xiao were the most indignant. Just as that voice said, they were also dissatisfied that Pang Xiao was treated so coldly. More and more people complained. In the hearts of the commoners, Pang Xiao was a hero, a famous general. If the Son of Heaven was a wise ruler, he should treat famous generals with courtesy like how the storytellers described. If he could personally welcome them, it would be more in line with everyone's imagination. Regardless of whether this imagination was reasonable or not, most people thought so. Some people said whatever they thought, and the complaints increased. In the imperial study, Li Qitian waited for 4 hours, but no one came. He was so angry that he slammed the table. Chapter 9-10. Several of his trusted officials bowed respectfully, not daring to say anything. Li Qitian was only complaining, so he didn't need a definite answer. He pursed his lips and sulked for a long time. Just as he was about to give orders, a burst of hurried footsteps came from outside the hall. Following that, an eunuch wearing an iron-gray round-necked sunflower gown quickly walked in. After saluting, he whispered a few words in Li Qitian's ear. Li Qitian was originally restraining his emotions, but after hearing the eunuch's report, he was finally on the verge of exploding. Impudent! He dares! Li Qitian suddenly roared angrily, scaring several people in the hall. They hurriedly knelt down and kowtowed. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Several people were quite confused. What exactly was Your Majesty angry about? Li Qitian said, "He's just an insignificant official. He went to the south to do business, so it's his duty to do well. Besides, if we didn't give him a chance to perform, how could he have made a name for himself? Now he's deliberately stirring up this kind of public opinion." The eunuch knelt on the ground, not daring to say anything. Li Qitian asked again, "Is this what the common people in the city are saying?" Replying to Your Majesty, many people are saying this. They feel that Your Majesty didn't personally go to greet them. It's really bullshit. What a big piece of bullshit. Li Qitian was so angry that he cursed. The officials who had been in the hall this whole time were all shrewd people. Thinking about the situation outside and seeing Your Majesty's angry appearance, it was obvious what was going on. Lu Heng, in particular, secretly shook his head again. He sighed with emotion at Qin Yining and Pang Zhao's meticulous planning. They had clearly calculated Your Majesty's temperament and all the variables. After Li Qitian cursed, his face darkened and he didn't say a word. He was worried that in his anger, he would say something disgraceful. That would be too degrading to his status as the emperor. However, the situation outside was too infuriating. Could it be that no one remembers Pang Zhishi's disobedience to the imperial edict? Now, everyone was praising him for his achievements. He was just an official. Since he had done his job well, did he still need to personally welcome him as the emperor? "Your Majesty, what do you plan to do?" an old official asked tentatively. Li Qitian said in a deep voice, "Shen will wait here. Let's see how long he can delay." "But Your Majesty, there are so many people outside. I'm afraid that even if Prince Zhongshuan comes late, it's because the people are pushing and shoving," Lu Heng said. Li Qitian's face was gloomy, and he gnashed his teeth. "He wants to use his merits to force me." "Your Majesty, the people are acting on their own accord," Lu Heng reminded submissively. However, because of Lu Heng's seemingly unintentional words, Li Qitian was burning with anger. Acting on their own accord. The people supported Pang Zhishi, and they even dared to privately complain that he was harsh on loyal officials. They even wanted him, the emperor, to personally welcome an official. The storytellers first appeared in the city, followed by the voices of the people. Before he could do anything to suppress them, Pang Xiao came back. He was even stationed outside the city and refused to come in. He waited until he was angry and gave the order before he was willing to return to the city. When he returned to the city, he immediately caused the situation. Li Qitian was not a stupid person. Even if he didn't realize it at the beginning, he had already figured it out. He had fallen into a trap. Acting on their own accord. Let's see how long they can act on their own accord. When Lu Heng heard this, he didn't try to persuade him anymore. In the end, after waiting for another hour, the spies reported that Pang Xiao had already moved forward a street with difficulty, and the number of people was increasing. Did all the people in the capital gather there? Li Qitian finally smashed his teacup in anger. The sound of broken porcelain was sharp and ear-piercing, and it made people's hearts tremble. Lu Heng and the others bowed their heads respectfully again. At this time, they all knew in their letters that they didn't need to persuade him in detail. With your Majesty's intelligence, what else could he not understand? However, although Li Qitian understood in his heart, that decision didn't make him feel good. Lu Heng. This official is here. Lu Heng, who was called out, knelt straight and listened quietly with his eyes lowered. Li Qitian said, "Tell me, what should we do now?" Lu Heng couldn't help but struggle in his heart. If he followed Li Qitian's temper, he would naturally scold Pang Zhishi and then persuade Li Qitian to wait in place. He didn't believe that Pang Zhishi could walk for 3 days and 3 nights in such a short distance. However, these words might be useful to your Majesty now, but after your Majesty calmed down, he would inevitably feel that he was being too slippery and flattering. Thinking of this, Lu Heng calmly said, replying to your Majesty, in this official's opinion, for the sake of expanding public opinion and for the sake of your Majesty's reputation and image among the people, it would be best for your Majesty to satisfy the expectations of the people. What Lu Heng said was actually what Li Qitian was thinking. However, this judgment made him feel too sullen. Li Qitian remained silent. Lu Heng continued to consolidate his image as a loyal official who dared to speak his mind. He said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, at this time, the people in the capital have gathered together. Regardless of whether or not chaos will occur, if you don't express your stance and allow Prince Zhongshuan to enter the palace, the public opinion will definitely be biased towards Prince Zhongshuan. There might even be people with ulterior motives who will secretly slander your Majesty and promote negative opinions. This official believes that since the matter has already reached this point, we should deal with it rationally and reduce losses." Although Li Qitian was angry, Lu Heng's words were very pertinent. Every word was for his sake, and he also understood. Li Qitian asked the others. Extremely senior officials were well versed in the ways of an official and were the best at reading people's expressions. They immediately expressed the same opinion as Lu Heng. Li Qitian's face was as calm as water. After a long time, he said, "Prepare the carriage. We are going out of the palace to personally welcome Prince Zhongshuan back to the capital." Immediately, the eunuchs responded and began to make preparations with great fanfare. Your Majesty is going out of the palace in person. Naturally, the extravagance will not be small. It has to be done according to the rules, and the preparations are quite tedious. Fortunately, the Jinmu guards and the Qianshou guards are always on standby. At this time, Pang Xiao was leading the troops slowly through the crowd with his horse. The people were also cordially surrounding Pang Xiao, admiring the handsome face of the great hero up close. At this time, a commotion came from the distance. "It's His Majesty is coming." The sound of a gong opening the way came from afar. In the distance, a yellow umbrella could be seen fluttering in the wind under the light gray sky. A figure wearing a red round-necked robe with arrow sleeves was sitting upright on the shoulder of the umbrella, like the stars surrounding the moon. Your Majesty is coming out of the palace. The people were shocked. The Jinmu guards and the Qianshou guards were vigilant. Even the people from the warden's office were so scared that their foreheads were covered in cold sweat. Your Majesty is a descendant of the heavens. If an accident happens, even if all of them were to be beheaded, it wouldn't be enough to accompany him to the grave. However, the people didn't think this way. In the stories, the wise His Majesty loved the talented. In reality, everything was developing according to their expectations. As a result, the voices that were criticizing Your Majesty for treating the meritorious subjects harshly died down. Instead, it was replaced by a cacophony of praises. Your Majesty really values Prince Zhongshuan very much. It must be because Wang Ye's contributions this time are too great. Your Majesty can't help but come out to personally welcome him. What a great honor this is. That's right. Your Majesty is wise. Wang Yi, Xiao Yong. The voices of the crowd rose and fell. The people all knelt on the ground and shouted, "Long live Your Majesty." Although the cries of "Long live Your Majesty" drowned out the initial discussions, Li Qitian could still clearly hear what the people were saying. Although his arrival refuted the rumors of him treating the meritorious subjects harshly, it also confirmed the fact that Pang Xiao was a meritorious subject. As a result, if he punished Pang Xiao for the crime of resisting the imperial decree, wouldn't he be giving the people a reason to criticize him? Pang Xiao was a meritorious subject. Not only did he not reward him, he even found an excuse to punish him. At that time, his reputation would definitely plummet. What a good Pang Zhishi. What a vicious plan. Li Qitian's heart was already burning with anger. However, he still had a very gentle smile on his face. He even occasionally waved at the kneeling people in greeting. The people saw that the emperor was so amiable and approachable. Everyone was so happy that they were about to go crazy. The cheers sounded again, shocking everyone's hearts like a tsunami. Pang Xiao was flattered and gave the reins to someone beside him. He walked out of the crowd and knelt on the ground, saying, "This subject greets Your Majesty. Long live Your Majesty, long live Your Majesty, long live Your Majesty. Younger brother, don't be like this." Li Qitian took off his shoulder sling and helped Pang Xiao up with a smile on his face. He held Pang Xiao's hand affectionately and looked him up and down. Then, he patted Pang Xiao's shoulder and said, "You've become stronger after going to the south." Pang Xiao smiled and respectfully said, "Replying to Your Majesty, perhaps it's because I've been in the military for too long. I didn't pay attention and became like this. Has Your Majesty always been well?" "Zhen is very well. It's because of loyal subjects like you who do your best to work for Zhen that Zhen can handle state affairs without any distractions. You've done very well. Your Majesty praises me too much. All of this is this subject's duty. I don't deserve Your Majesty's praise." Pang Xiao was about to bow again as he spoke. Since Li Qitian had come, he would not leave any room for gossip. He immediately took Pang Xiao's arm and stopped him from bowing. He pulled him and said, "Come, quickly return to the palace. Zhen still has many things to ask you about the border." "Yes." Pang Xiao respectfully responded. Li Qitian mounted his shoulder armor and Pang Xiao finally mounted his tall horse. With the protection of the 5 cities' warden's office and the Holy Chariot ceremonial guards, and with the fact that the people had gotten their wish to see the meeting between a wise ruler and a meritorious subject, they were extremely excited. Everyone retreated to the sides in an orderly manner. The stagnant troops finally moved slowly behind the Holy Chariot. The cheers of the people were earth-shaking. On one hand, Li Qitian maintained his dignity. On the other hand, he had to appear amiable. He suppressed the anger in his heart and secretly clenched his fists until his knuckles turned white. Just as the troops moved less than 100 steps, Pang Xiao, who was originally sitting upright on the horse, suddenly swayed. He held his temples with one hand and his eyes rolled back as he fell off the horse. "Your Highness." The commoners were all scared silly and shouted in panic. Huzi, Jinghu Wei, and the others beside the horse quickly caught him. They saw that Pang Zhao's eyes were tightly shut and he had already fainted. "Wang Yi, Wang Yi. Quick, find a doctor." The crowd was in chaos again. Li Qitian had just gotten a little more comfortable when he turned around and saw this scene again. He was so angry that his soul almost left his body. How could a man as tall as a small mountain faint for no reason? He was sure that Pang Zhishi did it on purpose. But the people did not think so. Someone in the crowd had already said, Wang Yi must have been too tired because of Nanjiang. He must have been tired from the journey and fell sick. Perhaps he suffered some injuries on the battlefield and developed a chronic illness. Chapter 9-11. With so many pairs of eyes watching, what could Li Qitian do at this time? He could only suppress the anger in his heart and complete the act. He got off his shoulder armor and personally went to check the situation. He loudly ordered someone to call for an imperial physician and pinched Pang Zhao's philtrum. Li Qitian held his breath and did not hold back. If it was an ordinary person who pretended to faint, they would have jumped up from the pinch. But Pang Zhao was still lying on the ground, powerless. Huzi, Xiaoyu, Su Weiji, and Jinghu Wei saw Li Qitian viciously pinch Wang Yi up close. They really wanted to go forward and kick him away, but their status was too different. The emperor was willing to condescend to be the most benevolent, and they could not move. At this time, there was a commotion outside the crowd. The common people parted to the sides like Moses parting the sea, and they all fixed their eyes on a woman in plain clothes who was walking quickly over. Qin Yining's beautiful face lost all color. Her bright and beautiful face was pale, and her glittering eyes were watery, making people feel pity for her. Wang Yi, Wang Yi. Qin Yining staggered to Pang Zhao's side and took the opportunity to rudely push Li Qitian away. Wang Yi, don't scare this concubine, Wang Yi. Others did not dare to push Li Qitian away, but she was Pang Zhao's wife. Seeing her husband faint, Li Qitian could not pursue the matter no matter what she did in a moment of desperation. Otherwise, if he argued with a woman, would he still have any face? Li Qitian stood up and looked coldly at the couple's act. However, there was no evidence, and there was no way to expose them. He gritted his teeth, but there was nothing he could do. Wang Yi. This concubine has nothing left. You are this concubine's only support. Nothing can happen to you. Qin Yining's tears fell like beads from a broken necklace. The sorrowful cries that sounded like those of an angry cat made many soft-hearted commoners feel sour in their noses. Why was it so tragic? Your Majesty still hasn't given us a clear explanation for Lord Qin's disappearance in the north. All of the family Qin's relatives, including Wang Fei's twins, were also killed by bandits on their way back to their hometown. The once enviable and happy woman was now dressed in white. Her family, relatives, and children were all gone overnight. Now, even her husband was sick and lying on the ground. Some people also shed tears. There were also people who were puzzled. The emperor's attitude towards Qin Huaiyuan's death was too thought-provoking. Many people couldn't help but start to speculate. Bandits had appeared on the Spirit Road and killed everyone. This was an earth-shattering tragedy, but the imperial court had not sworn an oath to capture the culprit. It was difficult for them not to suspect that someone had done this on purpose. Why? Wasn't it because Prince Zhongshuan's achievements overshadowed the emperor's? Some of the commoners were astute enough to analyze this. Many of the court officials thought this, but no one had the courage to say it out loud. After Li Qitian's anger subsided, he quickly realized that he had fallen into a trap again. He angrily gritted his teeth and anxiously said, "Why haven't you called the imperial physician yet?" "Yes." Xiong Jinshui hurriedly ordered the eunuch accompanying him. Bing Tang stepped forward at this time and took out a thin silver needle used for acupuncture. "Wang Fei, let this servant try." Qin Yining nodded repeatedly. She moved to the side and used her sleeve to wipe her tears. When the sleeve came close to her eyes immediately turned red and tears rolled out again. She cried like a pear blossom in the rain. Bing Tang pricked Pang Xiao's body twice. Pang Xiao immediately woke up. Qin Yining rushed forward in surprise. "Wang Yi." Pang Xiao was lying on the ground. When she saw Qin Yining, who had been separated for many days, she couldn't help but smile. "Sister Yi." Qin Yining also smiled through her tears. She helped Pang Xiao up and said, "Wang Yi, are you okay? You really scared this concubine." When Qin Yining helped Pang Xiao up, he accidentally stained Pang Xiao's face with his sleeve. A spicy and stimulating feeling suddenly rushed up, and his eyes immediately turned red. Pang Xiao couldn't help but feel helpless. Wasn't there too much ginger juice? No wonder his precious sister Yi cried so pitifully. However, many people around them still saw the tearful appearance of the husband and wife looking at each other. Many people thought of the hero's sad situation and felt sad. Some people even wiped away their tears. Pang Xiao was helped up by Qin Yining. He bowed weakly to Li Qitian. "Your Majesty, please forgive this official. This official offended Your Majesty. Your Majesty, please punish this official." Could Li Qitian punish him? If he was punished, he was afraid that he would be drowned by the people's spit. Li Qitian said with a face full of concern, "It's fine. We are brothers. Aren't you treating me as an outsider by saying this? This official doesn't dare." Pang Xiao bowed his head respectfully. Qin Yining used his other sleeve to wipe away his tears and curtsied. "Your Majesty, this official's wife has a presumptuous request. Wang Ye's body is weak and his situation is worrying. This official's wife would like to ask Your Majesty to allow Wang Yi to temporarily return to his residence to recuperate. When he gets better, he can enter the palace to report on his work. Is this possible?" As soon as Qin Yining finished speaking, Pang Xiao's tall body swayed. Qin Yining almost couldn't support himself. The people in the crowd exclaimed again. If there weren't so many people present, Li Qitian really wanted to strangle this cunning woman to death. She only made this request because she thought that he, as the son of heaven, still needed face. Pang Zhishi wasn't a good person either. She was taking advantage of him because he couldn't fall out with her. However, for the sake of his reputation, Li Qitian could only nod and agree. He also had to add, "I will send the imperial physician to the Wang estate to treat Zhishi later. Many thanks for Your Majesty's sympathy." Qin Yining once again curtsied respectfully. She turned and supported Pang Xiao with Huzi and the others to the horse carriage at the corner of the street. The people spontaneously opened up a path for them. Qin Yining helped Pang Xiao into the carriage first. Then, she stepped on the wooden stool and got into the carriage. The moment she put down the curtain, her gaze inadvertently met with Lu Hang's. Lu Hang's gaze was as warm and gentle as before. However, that emotion was only revealed for a moment before he returned to his indifferent appearance. The curtain was completely put down, blocking the view of the people outside the carriage. The Jinghu Wei followed behind the carriage and drove all the way to the Wang estate. As for the people at the back of the crowd, they spontaneously followed behind the carriage and sent Wang Yi back to the Wang estate in a grandiose manner. Only those who were close to the emperor and kneeling on the ground couldn't move. They could only lower their heads. Li Qitian got onto the carriage with a smile on his face and ordered, "Return to the palace." Your Majesty sets off. Long live the Emperor, long live the Emperor, long live the Emperor. The people knelt on the ground and respectfully sent them off. Li Qitian's imperial carriage came to personally welcome Pang Xiao, but in the end, it didn't receive her. It was a waste of time and caused people to talk about her behind her back for so long. Li Qitian, who was sitting on the carriage, was so angry that his body trembled. The people who followed Pang Xiao's carriage back to the Wang estate couldn't help but sigh when they saw the ruined courtyard walls and gates of the Wang estate. This was the Wang estate. It was poles apart from the splendid image of the Wang estate in their hearts. Wang Yi was fighting a war outside, living in the open, and risking his life. When he returned to the capital, his residence was only a little bigger, but it wasn't much better than the people's homes. After watching Wang Yi enter the Wang estate, Ji Yun followed Qin Yining's instructions and went to the gate to thank the people and ask them to disperse. When the gate to the Wang estate was completely closed, sighs could be heard from the crowd. Because they had just seen the emperor, no matter how far they were or whether they saw Li Qitian's appearance clearly, everyone tacitly didn't dare to talk about it. It was just that everyone more or less felt injustice for Pang Xiao in their hearts. A great hero had his entire family killed and fallen to such a state. At first, Your Majesty only arranged for a eunuch to deliver the decree. Perhaps because of public opinion, he had no choice but to personally come out to welcome her. Your Majesty treated a meritorious official too unfairly. Some people thought of the original Marquis Dingua Jiziu, the current Marquis Dingua. I heard that Prince Consort Ji only has a noble title now and doesn't have an official position. When these words were said, it caused many people to sigh. In the Wang estate, Xiaoyu, Su Weiji, Huzi, and Jinghu Wei had already been arranged by Ji Yun to rest in the outer courtyard. Qin Yining and Pang Xiao went to the main building of the second courtyard. Everyone didn't speak along the way. When they entered the room, Bing Tang brought people to serve tea and snacks and then stood guard outside the door. Pang Xiao looked at the clean and tidy furnishings in the room. Compared to the dilapidated scene they saw when they returned to the Wang estate, it was like the difference between heaven and earth. He relaxed and lay on the warm Kong bed by the window. Ah! We're finally home. Hee, my wife is so smart. He stretched out his large hand and pulled Qin Yining into his embrace. Qin Yining leaned against Pang Xiao's chest and said with a smile, "If I didn't appear quickly, he would be so angry. If he brought you into the palace, I'm afraid he would think of ways to punish you. I won't let you fall into his hands alone." She had been locked up in the palace, isolated and without help. That kind of feeling was simply helpless. If Pang Xiao was captured by Li Qitian in the wrong place, wouldn't she, who was outside the palace, be unable to do anything? Pang Xiao patted her thin shoulder with his large hand and said jokingly, "Don't tell me I can't go to court. You can claim to be sick." Qin Yining sat up straight, and a strand of her long hair fell over her shoulder. "What a good opportunity. Everyone saw that you were sick. You can claim to be sick and not go to court. Even if you go in the future, the limelight will have passed. Moreover, there are so many people in court. He won't have the chance to play dirty tricks on you. What if he accuses me?" Pang Xiao asked with a smile. Qin Yining's beautiful eyes turned craftily. "Actually, some things happened after I returned to the capital. When I entered the city that day, I happened to meet the 9th young master of Duke Chang's Fu. Before Qin Yining could finish speaking, the sound of Bing Tang came from outside. "Wang Fei, Chief Lu is here." Qin Yining stilled and hurriedly pressed Pang Xiao to lie down. She used ginger juice to smoke her eyes, and her tears flowed down again. "Quickly invite Chief Lu in," Qin Yining said to the outside with her nose wrinkled. Pang Xiao frowned in disapproval. "Use less next time. It's so spicy." Qin Yining took the time to stick out her tongue at Pang Xiao and make a face. Pang Xiao was so amused that he almost burst out laughing. But when he heard the footsteps outside approaching, he had to use all his strength to suppress it. In his heart, he had already pressed his cute sister Yi into his arms and kissed her tens of thousands of times. Chapter 9:12. Qin Yining said politely, "Thank you for your trouble, Magistrate Liu. Wang Fei is too polite. This is this lowly official's duty." Magistrate Liu moved forward and took out a pulse pillow. He half knelt next to the heated Kong by the window and carefully checked Pang Xiao's pulse. He placed 3 fingers on the ruler. After examining his hands with great concentration, he couldn't help but sigh inwardly. Although Prince Zhongshuan's body had old injuries, he had clearly been carefully nursed back to health. Now, he was full of energy and vigor. He was a man who was almost 50 years old, but his body was comparable to a youth in his early 20s. How could he faint? Then there was only one reason for fainting, and that was that Wang Yi wanted to faint. Magistrate Liu was skilled in medicine, but there were countless skilled people in the Imperial Academy of Medicine. He had been in the Imperial Academy of Medicine for many years. To be able to reach the position of Magistrate of the Imperial Academy of Medicine, he relied not only on his medical skills, but also on his smooth and sly conduct. His Highness has overworked himself. Deputy Hospital Head Liu probed implicitly. Pang Xiao nodded with a slight smile and said weakly, "There was heavy snow on the road back to the capital. The road was difficult to travel. This king was anxious to return home, so he had to eat and sleep in the open on the road." Magistrate Liu immediately nodded, "That's right." Wang Ye's old injuries flared up when he encountered the extremely cold weather and the bumpy road. However, this isn't a major cause. If he properly nursed himself back to health, it would take at least 3 to 5 days, and at most 3 to 5 months to get better. Qin Yining almost laughed when he heard this. Magistrate Liu was truly a wonderful person. The difference between 3 to 5 days and 3 to 5 months was great. There were many things that could be done. These words gave Pang Xiao face, "Could deal with your majesty," and also sold Pang Xiao's favor. It wouldn't infuriate the emperor and implicate him, and Pang Xiao definitely wouldn't expose him. It was truly a win-win situation. Many thanks to Magistrate Liu. Please go outside and write a prescription. Qin Yining wiped his tears and instructed Ji Yun to prepare a brush and ink. He also gave Chief Deputy Liu a big red envelope. Deputy Chief Liu accepted it with a smile. He gave a few more words of advice before leaving the prince's residence to report back to the palace. Seeing that he had left, Pang Xiao lay on the bed for a while longer. Then she jumped up and walked briskly to the door to take a look. She turned around and pulled Qin Yining's hand to sit on the heated Kong bed. "It's cold outside. Look at how cold your hands are. Are they frozen?" "Not bad." Qin Yining smiled and sat next to Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao looked at her red and swollen eyes and said, "Don't use such thick ginger juice next time. What if it's bad for your eyes?" "It's fine. I didn't use my sleeve to wipe my eyes. I was afraid that if I cried, it wouldn't be real enough and people would see through me. Wouldn't all my efforts be in vain?" Pang Xiao sighed and said, "When my sister Yi frowns, my heart clenches for a long time. Making you cry is worse than being stabbed with a knife." His large hand pulled Qin Yining into his embrace and kissed her forehead lovingly. "In the future, when everything is over, I definitely won't let you cry." Qin Yining couldn't help but smile, but the corners of her eyes were a bit moist. Perhaps the ginger juice on her sleeve was too strong. "All right, I cry when I'm happy. I cry when I'm unhappy. It's not something you can control." You don't know how many people envy me for being able to marry such a great hero like you. You understand me, love me, respect me, and give me enough space to display my abilities. This is something that many men can't do for their wives. I'm especially satisfied to be with you, so you really don't have to feel any psychological burden. Sister E. Peng Zhao's throat was dry for a moment. His Adam's apple bobbed up and down. After a long time, he smiled and said, "All right, you're my wife. We'll be in the same boat through thick and thin. No matter how many problems there are in the future, we'll solve them together. Although the situation is tense now, there will be a day when I can let you live a peaceful and comfortable life. Let's first suffer before the sweetness." That's right. Let's first suffer before the sweetness. There's a lifetime of happiness waiting for us to enjoy. Qin Yining smiled and leaned on Pang Zhao's shoulder. After some thought, she recounted how she was offended by Duke Chang's 9th young master, how she talked to Duke Chang, and how she beat him with a plank before sending him back. Pang Zhao said in shock, "So it's true. When my men were in the city looking for information, they found out about this. However, I thought that the rumors outside might not be true. Our family has always been at the center of the storm, so it's normal for people to spread rumors behind our backs. I didn't expect it to be true." Qin Yining raised her eyebrows. "Did I spoil your plans by doing this?" "Of course not." Pang Zhao touched her face and said with a smile, "You did very well. If I was here, I'm afraid I would beat him even harder." At the end, the coldness in Pang Zhao's eyes could not be concealed. Shang Jihua dared to flirt with his wife. It was already a blessing from the heavens that Shang Jihua's life was not taken. Qin Yining leaned close to her ear and told Pang Zhao his plan in detail. Pang Zhao blinked. She thought about how she cooperated with Qin Yining today and the reactions of the people in the city. Then she thought about Qin Yining's arrangements. She could not help but smile dotingly and joyfully. She pinched the tip of her nose with her fingers. "You naughty girl. Now someone is going to cry because of your tricks. Didn't I do it for you? If you don't like it, I don't have to continue." Qin Yining pretended to be proud as she said. Pang Zhao loved this look of hers. He hugged her waist and laughed. "How could I bear to do that? All right, we'll do as you say. We've had a hard time eating and sleeping in the open all the way back to the capital. During this time, I'll claim that I'm sick. Let's have a good rest at home." He leaned close to Qin Yining's ear and whispered, "Let's have a few days of shamelessness." Originally, the topic was very serious. Who would have thought that Pang Zhao would change it in the end? Qin Yining's ears turned red. She punched his chest unhappily. "You lecher. Why didn't I find out earlier that you were like this?" Pang Zhao grabbed her soft hand and rubbed the back of her hand with his thumb. "Who said that? When we first met, I acted like a hooligan. Have you forgotten?" Qin Yining couldn't help but blush when she recalled how this guy chased after her shirtless in the military camp and even dared to say that she was his woman. However, they were almost an old married couple now. Thinking back to those days, although there were times when they were embarrassed, most of them were warm and sweet. Pang Zhao saw Qin Yining's bashful appearance and his heart was already racing. He pulled her hand and coaxed her to talk. At this time, Li Qitian was in the imperial study listening to Deputy Chief Lu's report with a gloomy expression. "You mean to say that Prince Zhongshuan's old illness really has relapsed?" Deputy Chief Lu was nervous. "However, based on his judgment and understanding of your majesty, his words would definitely pass." Therefore, Deputy Chief Lu calmly nodded and said, "Replying to your majesty, that is indeed the case. Prince Zhongshuan has many large and small injuries on his body. When he returned to the capital this time, he was caught up in the heavy snow. The weather was cold and the ground was frozen. The cold penetrated his bones and his old injuries relapsed. When Li Qitian heard this, his heart inexplicably felt much better. He slowly nodded and said, "We will leave Prince Zhongshuan's health to you. You must do your best." Deputy Chief Lu lowered his head and respectfully said yes. Although he could vaguely sense that Your Majesty's words were unusual, he didn't want to get involved in these matters. He only pretended not to understand. Li Qitian casually waved his hand. Deputy Chief Lu hurriedly bowed and withdrew. Li Qitian's expression was gloomy. He crossed his legs and leaned against the arm of the Polonia wooden chair. His fingertips tapped his knees in a neither fast nor slow manner. When Pang Shao returned to the capital today, everything that had happened flashed through his mind. In the end, Li Qitian could conclude that he had long planned this. He had used the people's public opinion to force him to be a wise ruler and not punish a meritorious official. Today, he had left the palace to welcome Pang Shao. If he didn't go, it would prove that he mistreated a meritorious official. If he went, it would instead prove that Pang Shao was a meritorious official. Pang Zhao's actions in the south were indeed beneficial to the court, but who could say that Pang Zhao's actions were not for his own sake? For example, when Pang Shao had used the south to threaten him, he had no choice but to give up on the idea of killing Qin Yining. However, no one else knew about these secret confrontations. The officials didn't know, and the people didn't know. Li Qitian had rarely suffered losses. Now that he thought about it carefully, most of the losses he had suffered were related to Pang Shao. However, this time, it seemed that he would have to swallow this loss. Li Qitian tightly pursed his lips, but his eyes narrowed due to the high-speed operation of his brain. Pang Shao and Qin Yining really did spend a few days shamelessly at home. Although they didn't go out to play, their living conditions weren't much different from when they first went to the Lu family. The two read books together, or discussed what to do next. When they had nothing to do, they would casually play a game. In the end, there was even a bet to be made. After hearing Your Majesty's orders, Deputy Chief Lu would come to the Fu the next day to take the pulse. The records on the pulse were exactly as Pang Shao had shown. It had to be said that Deputy Chief Lu was really a smooth and sly person. This way, he could report on his own, not implicate his family, and not offend anyone. As a result, time quickly passed and it was the day of the court assembly. As usual, Pang Shao claimed that he was sick and couldn't go to court. However, at the court assembly, something happened that shocked the officials. The Duke of Changhua, Shang Chuan, came out of his office and knelt to impeach Prince Zhongshuan. Your Majesty, when Prince Zhongshuan returned to the capital, he gathered thousands of people and almost caused chaos in the city. The military department of the 5 cities had no choice but to send more people. As a result, there were many empty patrols in the city. If something big happened because of this, wouldn't people laugh at the security of the capital? As an important official in the court, Prince Zhongshuan is deeply trusted by Your Majesty. Acting so recklessly and disrupting the order of the capital is already a heinous crime. When Your Majesty personally came out of the palace to welcome him, he still lost his composure in front of the emperor. This is simply disrespectful. Prince Zhongshuan is an important official and should be an example for the other officials. His actions are truly unforgivable. Your Majesty, please punish him for a serious crime. The Duke of Changhua, Shang Chuan, was an old official from Beiji. He had always been low-key and wouldn't cause trouble. He was famous for being an easygoing person. However, today, he stood out to impeach Pang Shao. This really surprised all the civil and military officials in the court. However, when they thought of the rumors flying around the city a few days ago, some people said that Pang Shao and the Duke of Changhua were irreconcilable enemies. Chapter 9:13. Li Qitian's face was as calm as water, not saying anything. However, Duke Chang had clearly come prepared. Pang Shao had become a despicable person in his words. However, when Chang Guogong impeached Pang Shao, the content of his impeachment was nothing serious. Even if he was convicted, he could turn a blind eye to it. Obviously, it was not as shocking as the 10 major crimes that Li Qitian fabricated when he came prepared. Just as Duke Chang spoke, an imperial censor came out. Ban Xing bowed and added with righteous indignation. Your Majesty, Prince Zhongshuan was not only arrogant and disrupted the order of the capital, this official learned that it was already late at night when Prince Zhongshuan's consort returned to the capital. She did not observe the curfew and forced the city gate officials to open the city gates to let her in. Prince Zhongshuan's consort relied on nothing more than Prince Zhongshuan. For a woman to be so arrogant, it can be seen how Prince Zhongshuan normally is. When one person spoke, many imperial censors immediately came out to echo. For a moment, the imperial court was in chaos. Everyone was filled with anger, full of righteous indignation, as if Pang Shao had committed the most heinous crime of raping and pillaging. Li Qitian's forehead was already vaguely bulging with veins. However, under the imperial court, according to etiquette, the officials could not raise their heads to look directly at the emperor's face. Therefore, these people continued to impeach without understanding. Li Qitian gritted his teeth in hatred. Of all the times to impeach, they chose this time to impeach. Right now, the public opinion in the capital was flourishing. Could he punish Pang Shao? If he punished her, wouldn't it give people a reason to criticize him and make people think that he, the Son of Heaven, treated a meritorious official harshly? However, if he didn't punish her, first, there was such a good opportunity in front of him. Second, it was equivalent to indirectly exonerating Pang Shao. In the future, if he wanted to use these reasons to impeach Pang Shao, it would be slapping his own face. No matter how he thought about it, he was the one who was at a disadvantage. He didn't have a loyal subject who could understand his intentions. What was the point of having these things that were only pleasing to the eye but not to the eye? Li Qitian waited for Minister Du to finish speaking before he suppressed his anger and said coldly, "This matter needs to be investigated." Xiong Jinshui was standing closest to the emperor, so he naturally saw Li Qitian's twitching mouth and the bulging blue veins on his forehead. Fearing that Your Majesty would be affected by the dragon power, Xiong Jinshui hurriedly stepped forward and shouted while the officials were still in shock at the emperor's reaction. "Submit a memorial if you have one, withdraw if you don't." This meant that the emperor's pending investigation was enough to end the impeachment. Li Qitian's reaction was out of everyone's expectations, but no one dared to say anything at this time. Chang Guogong could only tactfully retreat for the time being. Qin Yining and Pang Shao soon heard about what happened in the imperial court. "Your Majesty must be in a bad mood right now." "That's right. He has long wanted to punish me for my crimes, but he has never succeeded. Earlier, when he ordered people to impeach me, the old officials of Beiji, represented by Chang Guogong, all held a wait-and-see attitude. Now that public opinion is at its peak, it's the most inappropriate time to impeach me. Yet, it happened here." Qin Yining couldn't help but laugh when he heard this. Li Qitian must be dying of anger right now. Wang Yi. "Yes, Magistrate Liu is here." Ji Yun, who was outside the door, reported. Pang Shao smiled, took off his soft boots, and got on the heated Kong bed. Qin Yining pulled a brocade blanket over him and covered him with it, then took a dark purple soft pillow for him to lean on. Magistrate Liu entered the room and first greeted him with proper etiquette. Then, he respectfully went forward to take his pulse as a matter of routine. If it was at the beginning, Pang Shao would still be a little weak from the long journey. Now that he had recuperated, he was even more energetic. Magistrate Lu couldn't help but secretly rejoice that Your Majesty only arranged for him to treat Wang Yi. If he occasionally sent someone to check on him, wouldn't he be exposed? Your Majesty would probably skin him alive. Wang Ye's body. Magistrate Lu hesitantly looked up at Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao covered his mouth and coughed twice. Magistrate Lu immediately understood and said, Wang Ye's body hasn't fully recovered, and his old injuries won't recover in a day or two. Please don't overwork Wang Yi and take care of himself. Pang Xiao nodded. Qin Yining worriedly asked, Magistrate Lu, please consider the prescription carefully. Is Wang Yi all right? Magistrate Lu said calmly, Wang Yi is fine, but you still need to follow this humble one's prescription. Qin Yining nodded and politely escorted Magistrate Lu out to write the prescription. After he left, the husband and wife looked at each other and burst into laughter. Just as the two were discussing what to eat for dinner, there was a sudden rush of footsteps outside the door. Bing Tang quickly walked in and said, Wang Yi, Wang Fei, Duke Ding has come to visit. All on. Pang Xiao sat up in surprise. In the few days he had been back, no one had come to visit, whether it was his former colleagues or comrades. The Wang Fu was deserted, and he deliberately didn't renovate the residence. If it wasn't for the occasional few servants walking around, the Wang Fu would be no different from a haunted house. He didn't expect that the first person to come, and the only one who dared to come, was still Jiziyu. Qin Yining said with emotion, at that time, Imperial Censor Dai Lin took advantage of the morning hall in our house to bring people to block the door and cause trouble. If Duke Ding hadn't arrived in time, who knows what would have happened. Now that you are sick, and he is the first one to come, we must not disappoint him. Pang Xiao nodded and stood up to greet him with Qin Yining. Not long after, he saw Jiziyu, who was tall and beautiful but cold as ice, wearing a light blue shirt with arrow sleeves and a cloak with a gray mouse collar on his shoulder, walking toward him. All on. Pang Xiao smiled and walked down the steps to greet him. When Jiziyu saw Pang Xiao, a smile appeared on his originally expressionless handsome face. The corners of his lips curled up slightly. She. He looked at Pang Xiao from head to toe. Are you feeling better? I'm fine. Pang Xiao held Jiziyu's wrist and said with a smile, we brothers haven't seen each other for a long time. How have you been? Jiziyu looked at Pang Xiao with a smile, then nodded at Qin Yining and followed him up the steps into the main room. Qin Yining smiled and went to prepare tea and refreshments. He left the room for the two brothers to catch up. Jiziyu took off his cloak and threw it on a chair. He and Pang Xiao sat on either side of the Kong table to warm the Kong. Pang Xiao held the pot and poured a cup of tea for Jiziyu. Have you been in the capital all this time? Has your Majesty arranged any other tasks for you? Jiziyu picked up the teacup and took a sip. He shook his head and said, no. But it doesn't matter. The way things are now is good. You, on the other hand. Jiziyu looked at Pang Xiao's rosy cheeks and high-spirited appearance. He couldn't help but laugh. It seems that your old illness isn't very serious. You should stay in the Fu to recuperate. Don't go out to stroll around. If your Majesty sees your rosy cheeks, he'll be so angry that he'll fall ill. It was rare for Jiziyu, a man of few words, to say so many teasing words in one breath. Pang Xiao laughed heartily and said, Jilan, you're still the same after not seeing you for so long. Jiziyu saw that Pang Xiao was so cheerful. He originally wanted to comfort Pang Xiao but didn't say anything. He only asked, you should know that Shang Chuan led a group of imperial censors to impeach you, right? Yes, I already know. Pang Xiao didn't hide the fact that he always paid attention to the news of the imperial court. Jiziyu said, you should also take precautions early. Your Majesty hasn't done anything now, but it doesn't mean that he won't do anything in the future. I heard that you and Shang Chuan had some irreconcilable enmity in the past. Let's start from the bottom. Even when we attacked Beiji, we did it according to official business. We never did anything excessive. How could we have any enmity with Shang Chuan? Pang Xiao laughed. Even if there was enmity in the past, De Zhou's imperial court has been established for 8 years. No matter how many enmities there are, they can't win against time. Now that everyone is living a stable life, why would he look for trouble for no reason? Pang Xiao thought for a while, then leaned closer to Ji Ziyu and whispered, "Don't worry, I have my own plans." Seeing Pang Xiao's confident look, Ji Ziyu's worried heart relaxed a little. Then, he said in realization, "I knew it. Your wife isn't a domineering and impulsive person. On the contrary, she is very cautious. She actually sent Shang Jihua back with a plank. There must be something else going on." When Pang Xiao heard Ji Ziyu's evaluation of Qin Yining, he felt relieved and laughed again. Ji Ziyu was also affected by Pang Xiao's laughter. He said with a smile, "Forget it. Since you have your own plans, I won't ask any more. If there's anything you want to do, just order someone to inform me. I have nothing to do at home anyway." Pang Xiao's gaze deepened, "So, you can do anything?" Ji Ziyu was stunned for a moment, then smiled, "Of course." His words seemed to have made some kind of promise. Pang Xiao and Ji Ziyu looked at each other and smiled. The two of them then talked about their lives after they parted. Although they didn't directly talk about politics, it was obvious that their opinions were still the same as before. Qin Yining had already prepared a table of food and came over to invite the two of them to take a seat. He didn't stay for long and casually ate 2 mouthfuls. Then, he excused himself and left, leaving the two of them alone. Ji Ziyu and Pang Xiao didn't pay attention to the rule of not talking while eating. They chatted while eating. "How are you going to deal with your impeachment today?" Without waiting for Pang Xiao's reply, Ji Ziyu sneered again, "Those imperial censors are like mad dogs. They're useless, but they don't let go of others. While you're fighting on the battlefield and sweating for the country, they're still enjoying themselves in the land of women. Now they want to get rid of you after you've outlived your usefulness." These words weren't just directed at the imperial censors, but also at Li Qitian. Pang Xiao patted Ji Ziyu's shoulder comfortingly and filled his wine cup. "Let's not talk about these troublesome matters. If they want to impeach me, then let them. Your Majesty won't immediately sentence me to death anyway. As long as I'm alive, there's nothing I can't overcome." As he spoke, he clinked his cup with Ji Ziyu. The two of them happily drank their cups. Pang Xiao then continued, "I plan to wait and see. I want to see what the people in the court think about this matter. It's rare to have such a good opportunity to test real gold." "You plan to pretend to compromise first?" "Yes." Pang Xiao smiled, "Even a man like me faints. It's not that difficult to admit defeat." Ji Ziyu smiled, "Don't say that. When I heard that you fainted, it really gave me a fright. We've suffered injuries and lost a lot of blood over the years. If some old illness relapses, it won't be a joke. You and I aren't teenagers anymore. Now that we're standing up, we should also think about recuperating." You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.